All right.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, our first matter will be approving the agenda.
So moved. Second.
Okay, I have one amendment. I would like to move up policy item 4B up to be with routine business item 2A, since Ms. Alexander is here, so we can discuss those two together.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Mr. Zigray and a second by Mr. Kisner. Do we want to do this as a voice vote?
Yeah, the original, Mr. Zigray and Kisner, right?
Yep.
Zigray, second, Kisner. If we can do a voice vote, Mr. Tappan.
Okay, so this is for the amendment.
Yes.
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 4-0.
Okay, and
Then we actually have to take a vote on the actual
Okay.
motion now.
is there any other changes to the agenda? Okay.
Okay, voting is open. Motion passes 4-0.
Okay, so we have no recognitions, so we'll move next to delegations. First on the list is Ms. Vicki Harris regarding high school math textbooks. Okay, you can join us at the mic. You have 5 minutes that you can speak. Just to kind of give you some, normally we won't interact, we'll listen.
Okay.
This is on the agenda, so if board members would want to ask questions, they can, but normally we just listen, we take it under advisement, then we can always put it on the agenda for a future meeting.
Okay. My son was in Algebra 2 his junior year. We came from Trinity. He started up here his second half. My concern, of course, talking to Mr. Martin, I understand that you are going to be doing a new math curriculum. So I don't know how much this will play into it, but I can't understand how teachers here teach math without a math book. I have dyslexia, so not having a math book, and Ryan also had it, made it extremely hard. I'll give you a day in Mr. Joyce's class, which is who he had. Ryan said he would come in, he would sit down, he would spend 5 to 10 minutes at his computer, then he'd get up, he'd put the problem on the board, he'd go over said problem. If the students had a question and asked him to go over it, he went over it one more time. On this particular occasion, Ryan said one of the other boys that was doing fairly well had asked...
Mr. Harris, I'm gonna interrupt you. Just please don't mention any names.
Oh, okay.
Like either your child, other children, and no employees. Just no names and,
Oh, okay.
okay.
And asked for him to go over it again, and he said no. And then spent another 5 minutes to 10 printing off the worksheets and handing them out. You know, my concern is that without books, they have nothing to look at. 2, if homework isn't assigned, how do you know if the kids are doing any good? And if they do have homework, it's not graded. It's not even looked at. So how do the kids know what they're doing or how well they're doing? I feel that that's an issue. Now, whether that will be with the new curriculum, I don't know. One of the other teachers for math had informed her freshman class that half of them will not pass her class. That's not exactly encouraging to the students that are sitting there. Some are going to have a harder time than others. You know, to me, if that's the case, then maybe it's the way the teacher teaches and not necessarily kids. You know, I had text anxiety. So If the kids have no homework and all their grades are, it's quizzes and tests, and they don't do well, you've already set them up for failure. You wonder why your math scores are low? There's no homework. It's not looked at by some of the teachers. If it's not graded, you know, and if the number of students are a problem, then go back to how we did it when we had math class. All your tests are passed back. The last one comes forward, everybody grades. They go back. The teacher goes over the ones that everybody seemed to miss. She collects them, she grades them. I don't find that hard to do. That's how our teachers got homework graded without having to spend hour upon hour upon hour grading. It just seems like we're setting the kids up for failure in math if they don't have homework Monday through Thursday. And if it's not graded, how are they going to know if they did right or wrong? You know, Brian was here for 5 weeks, and I went in and spoke to the teacher, and it did me no good. And, you know, he was making C's in his Algebra 2 at Trinity. He had an F. He had to do it over summer school. But he had no book. The books were not on the laptop, so he couldn't even look at that if he wanted to. And I just feel that that's an extreme problem going forward, and depending on how the new curriculum works, you know, if the kids don't have more than just quizzes and tests to fall back on, they're not going to score well. Some will do perfectly fine. I mean, there's some students that can just do it and it's no problem. But what about the ones that struggle? You know, it's not exactly fair to them because they're getting set up for failure right off the gate. You know, there should be homework and it should be graded and it should be looked at. So I didn't get a chance. Mr. Martin had suggested I could get to look, but no one had called for me to take a look at the new curriculum.
Mrs. Layton's been out, Mrs. Harris, but if you'd like to stop up this week, we,
Oh, well, that's fine. Like I said, I don't know
Sure.
how that one's going to work, but I did know, you know, you indicated there would be books this time.
yes.
But it still comes back to, if they're not getting homework, you know, math's hard. It's something that you build from one step to the next step to the next step. And if it's not practiced regularly, some of the kids aren't going to get it. I mean, algebra to me looks like it's Greek. So, thank you.
If I may get one
What's
point of
the-
clarification, when you say there was no book, did you ask the teacher about the book?
I walked into his class to discuss it and asked about books, and he said he didn't have one. There were Algebra 2 books sitting at his door, 4 to 5 stacks high, 4 to 5 stacks deep.
Okay. So he told you that there was no, or at least your understanding from the teacher was that there was no textbook.
Algebra 2 books,
That-
so yeah, that's what was sitting right there was Algebra 2
Right.
books.
So they said nothing about a digital access or an access through the laptop.
Wait, and my son looked. He looked online, and it was not on there.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate the clarification.
Okay, that's what I wanted to make sure. When you went online to look for the book, you couldn't find it.
It was not on there.
Okay, you know, in my personal, you know, I don't know the situation here, but my personal opinion on homework, it should be checked one way or another. If they didn't do it in class on the board individually, each problem, I mean, sometimes you could pick up homework and grade it at home. You don't have to do the whole thing, but, you know, a lot of times you check through certain problems and find certain problems students are having trouble with. And I think that's the way it should be done. And I'm for books, at least one set in the classroom.
Well, and I think that, yeah, that's perfectly fair. I know they're not cheap.
Yeah.
But if they can be put on the laptop, that makes perfect sense. You know, and when I say homework, I'm not meaning they should have 20 problems every night. 5 to 10 is probably all they really need to master what they need to do. But my daughter struggled her freshman year. I mean, she passed Algebra 1 with D's straight across the board. And she had no book.
The digital textbook is available online, Mrs. Harris. I apologize if that wasn't clearly conveyed to you by the teacher in question. The books aren't necessarily loaded on the devices per se, because again, they're able to access that through an online curriculum. Now, the newly adopted textbook series will include physical, tangible textbooks for students.
Well, I said he tried to find it online, and I even looked, because sometimes he overlooks things. So I tried my best, and I
Understood.
maybe you just were not looking in the right place.
The only other thing I would add, Mr. Tatham, is the process of, for example, like students grading each other's papers would create an issue of confidentiality for the other students.
Yeah, but you don't have to do it that way. You could put the individual problems on the board. There's many ways to
Sure.
grade homework.
Absolutely.
And you don't have to grade, if you assign 20 problems, you could grade 10 out of 20. So there's multiple ways of grading it. And I know it takes time, but that's what we're in the business here. You know, if you're not going to grade the homework, don't assign it. Or assign less so you can get it graded and give students a feedback in a comparable amount of time.
How about I propose at this point that if a board member would like us to talk about this future as we go in, especially since we have a new math adoption that we have approved and that will be rolling out this year, that we put it on the agenda for a future meeting, then we can discuss it then. Okay? So next on the delegation list is Mrs. Amanda Alexander. We have, if you would like, Ms. Alexander, like we did previously, we have the items on the agenda. If you'd like to save your time and talk, then you can, or you can talk now. It's your choice.
I'll go ahead and talk now.
Okay, so same thing, 5 minutes. Please don't mention any names of students, other parents, volunteers, employees, etc. Okay?
Got ya. Okay, so basically, I talked to Mr. Martin about this just a little bit ago, prior to the meeting. I am asking, along with the code of conduct that you guys do for a yearly kind of check-in with the teachers, to also potentially set it up to where every 3 years or every 5 years, they also have a background check. Because quite frankly, I don't trust that someone will be completely honest always on that code of conduct form. And I would think that if there's the potential for a higher volume of numbers of background checks being done, even in the employee regard, then that would also lower the cost going through a company to get those done, which would also then help and turn around with the volunteer chaperone kind of aspect too. I also wanted to ask that in with this code of conduct affirmation kind of thing, that if it was later found out that they had lied on that, what exactly the consequences would be, per se, per employee that had lied on that. And other than that, that's pretty much all I have on the employees. And I'm going to check into what I talked to Mr. Martin about, their yearly or every 3 year, every 5 year, whatever it may be, trainings that they have to make sure that.
I can send you a digital document that like shows the
Okay.
interval of trainings that are required, so if that'll be helpful to you.
Yeah, that would be.
Okay.
Thank you.
So just to clarify, you have 2 issues that you want us to discuss when we get to that point on the agenda, having a 3 to 5 year checkup for backgrounds, and then also consequences if employees lie on the code of conduct disclosure. Those
Yes,
are the
sir.
2 issues. Okay, thank you, we appreciate
you.
it.
Now, when I looked into this earlier, from what a couple of people told me, it falls mainly on the principal to do a lot of this checking.
Well, in this, for tonight, Mr. Zigray, the only policy that's up for review is a potential modification to the employee code of conduct, which from the discussion from the previous meeting involved the potential for a annual disclosure statement that an employee could disclose if they've had any illegal infractions. And I think as the policy reads, it'll from I think it was June 30th in the prior year up to the point of time in which the employee completes the code of conduct, which generally happens in early August each year when the employees return to their work.
And we can get to that more in a minute. Let's go ahead and with our next few items. We have no presentations. Next on the agenda is approving the minutes for the July 8th, 2024 meeting.
So moved. Second.
Okay, it's moved by Mr. Kisner, second by Mr. Hovatter, and the 3 of us were present for that meeting. I'll call the vote. I'm sorry, is there any discussion about the minutes or any changes? Okay, so we'll call the vote.
Voting is open. Motion passes 3-0 with one abstention.
Okay, next on the agenda is the meeting minutes for the June 27th, 2024 meeting.
Sorry about that, Mr. Taker.
Move we approve the minutes from 6/27/24.
Second.
Okay, moved by Mr. Kisner, second by Mr. Zigray. Is there any discussion, corrections, or changes for the minutes? Okay, seeing none, call the vote.
Voting is open. Motion passes 3-0 with one abstention.
Okay, so next on the agenda, we have the visitor, volunteer, and chaperone policy review and background check policies and procedures related to the employee hiring. I think it's okay if there's no objection that we also go at the same time talk about the Preston County Schools Policy 810, which is the Employee Code of Conduct. The 810 is an action item, and it's for the first reading of proposed changes to the Employee Code of Conduct. So just going back, if there's any comments, discussion in general, especially Mr. Zigray, since you weren't here for it, about what we discussed last week under the visitor and volunteer and chaperone policy review, we can do that first if you'd like.
Yeah, that's fine.
Is there any follow-up discussion about that or questions?
I had questions about what responsibility the principal has as far as checking up, and what responsibility does the central office have?
In regards to, okay, so I just want to make sure I clarify your question, Mr. Zigray. In regards to the Employee Code of Conduct for prospective employee hires, the onus of that is based upon the central office and the Department of Education. Professional employees have to go through a process for licensure that requires them to do a background check that if there is a potential issue, if there's a felony, and Mrs. Varner, feel free to step in any time if I misspeak. If there's a felony infraction on the background check, that would the employee would be excluded from being able to be considered for hiring. If there are misdemeanor matters on there, the Department of Ed will typically require the prospective employee to provide a disclosure or to provide a report with greater detail as to the circumstances of the potential legal infraction. At that juncture, the department will make a determination if they can proceed forward with the prospective licensure. With service personnel, we receive the physical background checks. If there are, again, felony-based would exclude the individual from being considered for hire. However, we can assess, for example, misdemeanor. Typically, Mrs. Varner and I will sit down and almost a similar process that if an employee has a matter that, that we want additional information, we can request as such. I think, though, there's a number of considerations you have to look at in that situation. For example, the number of years that has passed since the legal infraction, the type of infraction. Does the type of infraction, would that be, potentially impact the employee's work or could spill into the workplace in some capacity? So those are some of the considerations we would take locally as we look at a matter, whether it's professional or service. But service personnel, we have to look at those directly because we receive those background checks, whereas the professional employees, those are screened at the State Department level.
Okay, now, do they let them know if someone's applying and they don't get the job? Are they informed of that for that reason, or?
There's an email system from the Department of Ed. Also, though, if we are aware of situations in which there's been legal infractions or matters that we have had to, potentially impact an employee's employment status, whether it's been suspensions or potential termination of employment, we are able to notify the Department of Ed. There's a known list that Mrs. Varner can review before making prospective hires as well.
All right. Okay.
Okay, so the other parts of the discussion that we also had was talking about, Mr. Zigray, was our background check policies for volunteers and also for chaperones and visitors. And so what we decided, Mrs. Alexander brought, we had a really healthy discussion. We had Mrs. Croyle on the meeting with it, and that there were several areas that we can work on. But we thought that the easiest way to start making some positive improvement, to make our system better, was to enhance or to modify the employee code of conduct with a self-disclosure statement where employees have to bring forward if they've had any situations, I guess. I mean, it's very similar to what we currently require of chaperones and volunteers, where they have to self-disclose. So one question Mrs. Alexander had was, what would be the consequence if employees don't tell us that they've had an infraction? So Mr. Martin, can you address that?
I just want to make sure in terms of how the verbiage reads within the policy.
And just while he's looking for that, I mean, I think this is one of the things that I had brought up in that meeting, is just saying like, hey, we could add this there. But the mindset being, if an employee breaks the code of conduct, we have grounds for dismissal, we have grounds for action of different nature. And again, he's going to read the policy. But the thought was, if we at least add that disclosure, we now have something, we may not have had something that we could move on innately based on if it was a minor misdemeanor, a minor infraction. But if they don't report it, if they don't release it, it gives us further grounds to do follow-up was the mindset that.
Yeah.
And if I would read directly above the signature line for the candidate from the proposed policy, I certify that the answers given by me to all questions on this application and any attachments are, to the best of my knowledge and belief, true and correct, and that I have not knowingly withheld any pertinent facts or circumstances. I understand that any omission or misrepresentation of fact in this application may result in suspension or termination of my employment.
So in essence, it enables the board to start a disciplinary process specifically because of a proven offense where they failed to disclose something.
Right.
But I would say the potential termination or suspension in this instance is, again, is withholding information.
Right.
The simple fact that an employee has potentially had a legal matter within the calendar year does not necessarily result or trigger termination or suspension. It depends upon, obviously, the circumstances of the infraction.
So I kind of have an issue with this. This is an annual there should be something put in here that in the year, if something happens and they get charged or whatever, that they should have a timeline that they have to report that. If it happened the week after they signed this, that gives them 51 weeks before they have to report it again. I think they should have a 72-hour window or a 96-hour window or something. I mean, as our employee or chaperone or whatever.
That's a valid comment. I mean, Mr. Martin, what do you?
If that's the will of the board, that's something that can be instituted within the policy. That does not stand in there currently.
Yeah, I don't know, like within 72 hours, are they really going to know if they're charged and the process, they have to go through the process? I mean, I'd give them a little more time, 72 hours.
Well, I just threw that out there. I'm not saying, but
Yeah.
I don't think we should have to wait possibly almost
Right,
another
the
whole year.
Yes, I understand, yeah. I know what you're saying.
So just for the record, the body of it, conviction is an adjudication of guilt and includes determinations before a court, district judge, or a magistrate, or to result in a fine, sentence, or probation. So I think that it's saying like, right, it's based on convictions, not based on even the allegations or even being charged.
The two disclosures over the past year, were you ever convicted of a criminal offense? Or are you currently under the charges for a criminal offense?
Okay.
Yeah.
So then the
So
charges
even
of
if
a
you've
criminal
been
offense would be,
Right.
how does one know that they are under charges? Is that when the police cuff you and read you your Miranda rights? Or is that, like, I don't know.
These are very.
Fortunately, not been caught yet.
These are typical disclosure statements that the Department of Education uses. There's about 6 disclosure statements, and I believe the second one is, almost verbatim from that language.
This year's verbatim from the Department of Education?
No, they have about 6 disclosures that you have to go through, but these would be two of those six, I mean, almost word for word. I'd have to pull that up. I don't know that for certain, but.
So, Mr. Martin, I assume that what you presented, which, by the way, thank you. Like, this was wonderful, immediate action. I appreciate how quickly the turnaround is on this. I assume that you had Ms. Croyle or someone review it already.
I've sent that out to Mrs. Croy. I have not gotten back. So
Okay.
if there are any legal, I mean, before we got to a second read, I would make sure. that
So we could
you-
inquire with her as to the appropriate way. I mean, like, again, I assume somebody knows when they're being charged. You know, that there's
I would
probably
think so,
some,
yes.
some very blatant action. But to that point that we could I think Mr. Hobatter's point is very relevant and a great one. Like, it should be timely. I don't care if it's 72 hours. I don't care. I mean,
Oh,
I'm
thank
fine
you.
with a week, like, to be honest, like, but I think some kind of verbiage and some kind of a timeline to make it very forthcoming would be a good idea.
I think
The
they should
typical
report it
disclosures
quickly.
here, guys, would be, have you ever had any adverse action taken against any application, certificate, or license in any state? Adverse action includes but is not limited to the following: letter of warning, reprimand, denial, suspension, revocation, voluntary surrender, or cancellation. Have you ever been disciplined, reprimanded, suspended, or discharged from any employment because of allegations of misconduct? Have you ever resigned, entered into a settlement agreement, or otherwise left employment as a result of alleged misconduct? Is there any action now pending against you from alleged misconduct in the school district court or before any educator licensing agency? Have you ever been arrested or charged with, convicted, or currently under indictment for a felony? Have you ever been arrested, charged with, or convicted for a misdemeanor? For the purpose of this application, minor traffic violations should not be reported. Charges of conviction for driving while intoxicated, DWI, or driving under the influence of alcohol or other drugs, DUI, must be reported. That's specifically what the department uses in their annual, or their upfront disclosures for employees that are applying for licensure.
So if I hear that correctly, then the first three wouldn't apply at all because that would only be done before you're certified. But the
Right.
last three could happen once you're hired, right?
Yeah.
A separate question, and I don't know, so someone can inform me. Between a first reading and a second reading, can any changes be made?
Well, that's, I would say this, Mr. Tatham, before I vetted this with legal, I wanted to put a proposal before you all so that if you brought forth changes, I felt like that was really the time, rather than basically spending for legal advice twice. To put this forth, Mrs. Quirrell could make adjustments and I could really bring this back. I could ask her, I'm not certain if we make changes to the original, we may have to start the first read, second read process over, but, because there has to be an opportunity for public input.
Okay. Is there additional changes to this in addition to what Mr. Hovatter brought forward?
I just think we need to define, if we're going to say you need to respond or let us know in a relatively quick manner what we feel. We don't want a gray area. Well, that was quick to me, but not, you know, we need to define the terms in which they have the amount of time to let us know.
Okay.
I think Ms. Croyle can clarify. I mean, how when someone, again, I assume it's an obvious process, but I don't want to make that assumption, like how they know they're being charged. But again, they may not be able to notify you in that or that may not be on their mind if they're sitting in a court waiting on bail, or I mean, sitting in a jail cell waiting.
right.
So I don't, she's going to have better insight on that, or whatever
Well,
legal counsel you
I think
choose to use.
a reasonable timeline, you know, we may not be talking hours, we may be
Right.
talking days, but I mean.
Correct.
I understand from Mr. Hovatter's perspective, you know, some type of timeline for reporting, you know, in year.
Okay, so we want to add a timeline to it. Are there any other suggested changes?
I did have one question on the form, Mr. Martin. You had modified sorry, I scrolled. This form will be maintained in the employee's personnel file and removed that. What was the mindset of removing that statement from the form?
Because the Employee Code of Conduct, we typically encompass this, and we could add that back, but we generally do that through a digital platform in which it keeps the record of submission. It may be advisable for us to print those out and maintain a paper copy, but that was the mindset though, and the fact that right now, and I think I'd mentioned to Mrs. Alexander before the meeting, we use the vector solution system. We're actually, the employees have found, I mean, they don't like doing policy reviews generally. I don't know that anybody loves doing, I mean, Mrs. Bomar's there, she could probably speak to that. But the platform itself, we have found that it's relatively easy to use. It requires the employee to utilize their employee number, but log in and accessing the modules is a relatively easy process. It has good reporting options in the aftermath, so I could run a report at West Preston and see every teacher who has fulfilled all of their required policies, and I could identify those that still need to complete certain policies. So we felt like by entering into that platform, it definitely gives us, a better ability to track this. Which, again, we have certain annual required policy trainings that we've inputted into the system, or there are already pre-existing modules. We've taken certain district policies that we feel are important to implement. They're not required per se, but we feel they're important enough to put in for employee review. But again, the state tells us there are certain things that we have to do on annual basis, on every 3-year basis, whatever. But that was the mindset there, is just the fact that employees would generally do that through the online platform.
That's fine. The fact that it was removed, that meant that there was some amount. So it's just, we're reporting it someplace else.
I just wanted to be sure that, we kind of talked about last time, some things that we have in policy that don't necessarily align with our common practice. So I felt like that was kind of what was in mind there.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
I would just say, add to that if we're going to do this as an online form, that we also, as maybe part of the beginning of the school year orientation, welcome, that we address it with employees verbally, face to face, of letting them know that this is a change, if the board does make
sure.
that change,
Yeah.
so that they alert to them, and the reasoning behind it.
Yeah, I have not announced the Vector Solutions. I will probably pull back the employee code of conduct right now while this is still a bit in flux, but we do need to get that accomplished. So, obviously, time is of the essence on this, and it would be my intent to bring this back to you all at our next available meeting.
Okay, so is there any comments or discussion regarding the 3 to 5 year background check that Mrs. Alexander brought? Is there any discussion on that at this time? Or is that something we want to look into further?
My first thought, what did we do? What, $50 per time? Now, are our students worth it? So but just saying, that's the first thing that comes to my mind is, how many teachers will we then be redoing this for? Again, if we do it every 3 or 5 years, what kind of cost would we be looking at? It's going to be substantial, but I don't remember
So
the
we
number
want to
of
see the
teachers on
cost and
that.
kind of where it's coming out of the budget.
Well, we
basically.
probably know approximate number of teachers that we have on staff.
We would have total staffing within the county is about 674.
Okay, so $30,000? Or, no?
Not if you had them on a rotating interval.
30,000. So, to clarify, this would just be to double check that they're doing what they're supposed to be? Because right now, we're only doing a background check for the hiring process, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So we basically have to decide if we want to do it 3 years to 5 years or at all.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's not a decision we're making tonight, we have it
Right.
for discussion. If there's anything that we want, if we'd like the superintendent to look into stuff further and get us some firm numbers, this would be a time that we would say, hey, I think this is important, let's look into it further.
Mr. Chambers, did I have any more minutes left?
I believe you did, actually. I think you used 2.5.
Okay, so as far as the every 3 or every 5, if that was proposed in something to do with a levy, I'm quite sure that that would, under the safety part, be something that more Preston County families would be willing to vote for because it's ensuring their child's safety. That's 1. 2, as far as it goes with what the state requirements are for employees and misdemeanors, can Preston County adopt something that says that if those misdemeanors, not necessarily per what Mr. Martin's saying, they're looking at these misdemeanors and saying, oh, they were 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. Can Preston County adopt a thing that says that there will be no teachers with misdemeanors teaching in Preston County schools within a 10-year period?
With misdemeanors?
Yeah. If they involve a minor.
My only concern with that, Mrs. Alexander, is you have a board that would be committing itself to an action beyond their potential term. That would be the one issue I think I would see with that is this board, I don't know that they could take action that say in 10 years they'll accomplish this because there's no assurance that these members or myself
Would be
would
the
be
same.
still associated.
Okay.
No.
All right, that answers that question. Trying to think, because I know the state doesn't have pretty much, like I said, the state is saying, like, so long as you're not charged with first-degree sexual assault, murder, or neglect or abuse, then you're pretty much free to go. So my question is you're saying that they're looking at that and they're saying that there's no felonies, so those teachers are checked at the state level and they don't actually come back to you guys for where you know specifically what misdemeanors or whatnot they were charged with?
Yes, they have to, when they fill out those questions, it's an online application, so I get
You get their response?
the response.
Okay. So that's what you're basing like the decisions off of, per like what their response were, what the charges were, kind of thing, how long ago, all of that. Okay, that makes sense. That's all.
I would like to speak on the first question she had about adding it to the levy. I don't think we'd want to do that, even though for the safety aspect, because then you'd be misleading the public thinking that the only time we're going to do the background checks is in 3 to 5 years, is if the levy passes. I mean, if we're going to do it, we have to do it out of general funds or however the regular funds we get. We don't want to add that to a levy call, in my opinion.
It's not, in the current levy proposal that's here, we would have to get a legal advice as if to other related expenses could be encompassed by what Mrs. Alexander had suggested. And that may meet the criterion. I mean, it is potentially certainly a safety matter, but I think before there was any consideration to that, we would want to make sure that legally it meets the definition of what was defined within a potential levy call.
And then also what we already have in the budget, what we're already using budgeting that money and planning that money for. I mean, we
Correct.
basically create the levy because we know we have specific needs. And so we go about it of saying, how much do we need and where is it going, where this would be an additional.
Right.
So I would imagine that if the board does decide to take action on this, we need to look at the budget holistically and say, where would the money come from? And then weigh it with what would we be giving up? Because that money would have
Right.
gone to something
Right, it
else
has to come
instead.
somewhere.
Okay. Other discussion regarding this topic in general? Okay, and so it sounds like to me that regarding policy 8010, we don't have any action at this time, that we would like Mr. Martin to work on a little bit more and bring it back. So I don't think we need any motion to postpone that. We can just put it back on the agenda. Is there any objection to that?
Do we
Okay.
need a motion to table, or can we just proceed without a vote on the matter? I just want to be sure.
With it not having been motioned on yet, you don't have to do anything.
Okay.
Okay, so now we will jump up to, but we're back to 2B, middle school soccer. A recommendation has been made from the administration that the board approve the development of middle school unified boys and girls soccer teams for the 2024-25 school year based on the provisions listed below in the public comment fields. And Mr. Martin, can you just give us a quick overview?
Sure. I was approached in May of 2024 from the PHS athletic director at the time, Mr. Channel, Principal Todd Seymour, PHS head boys coach Josh Russell, head girls coach Craig Whitehair, to discuss the possibility of the formation of school level or unified middle school soccer programs pending sufficient interest levels. What we have implemented a number of new sports offerings over the last several years. We have added volleyball, we have added softball, we have added baseball. Typically, the first year of those programs, that the coaching contracts have been on a volunteer basis in the fact to see if the sport will actually gain sufficient footing in that first year to continue. I can recall as back in 2001, starting middle school cross country, and that was about a 4 or 5 year odyssey without contract. But the idea is initially, because this wasn't a budgeted matter by the board, that the board was not going to be taking on any fiscal responsibility at this point in the first year of the sport. So that was one thing that was conveyed to Mr. Russell and to Mr. Whitehair. There was a interest survey that was published on our social media site. Collectively, 23 boys from Brewston, Central, South, Terre Alta, West, and one homeschool student, and 33 girls from Aurora, Brewston, Central Preston, South, Terre Alta, West, and homeschool. In review of the total allocated numbers, one thing that you have to look at with a consolidated program is, do you have sufficient numbers in a given attendance area to necessitate the need for an individual team? At this point, I did not see sufficient numbers in any particular area. There was probably some consideration to the Central Preston girls' numbers, which were in the mid-teens. I do think that, and again, you're basing this off of survey numbers. Survey numbers typically are going to be a little bit higher than probably actual numbers of athletes turned out. Based upon the numbers that were submitted, the thought process was, if this is something the board would approve, to request permission from the WVSSAC for what's called a consolidated or unified concept. We have several sports set up in that manner right now. Angie, you might want to hit that board. It's about ready to go. We have a consolidated program in regards to football, which feeds from the middle school communities. We have a consolidated wrestling program. We have partially consolidated basketball programs. For example, students from Roseburg, for boys basketball, go to South Preston. For girls basketball, go to Aurora. We've had some partial consolidations in regards to baseball and softball, where South Preston feeds to West Preston, and I believe Terrell to East Preston, Aurora, and Roseburg for those sports, trying to determine sufficient numbers. So based upon the numbers submitted, we felt like that a unified concept was probably advisable. Unified concept is good on one hand in the fact that, again, it ensures that it gives you a better opportunity probably to have sufficient numbers to field a competitive team. The drawback obviously would be is you have students that have to travel from other areas of the county. That would certainly be a drawback. Prospective coaches, we would have to look at, for example, their ability to practice. Ideally, if a program can practice after school, in most of our school communities, we would have busing options heading to Kingwood, which could potentially avail transportation options for those students. Several students, in looking at the survey, it was known that several of the students who expressed interest were also playing multiple other sports in some instances. Some were volleyball players, some were cross country. Certainly, it's not that kids cannot do multiple sports, but I just thought it was important to know that some of these prospective interested students are involved in multiple programs already. Pending board approval, a volunteer head coaching position would be posted for both boys and a girls team for the 24-25. I've had discussions with Principal Paul Martin, who has indicated a willingness to serve as the administrator for the proposed programs, obviously contingent upon local board approval and the WVSSA's approval. Uniforms and equipment would be the responsibility of the schools and participating athletes. While Mr. Martin at Central Preston would be the administrator for that school, they would look at, for example, the number of students that are participating, say, from West or Brewston, and there would be the potential for those schools to be able to contribute to funding that would be necessary for the startup of the program. Practice times and locations would have to be determined by the hired coaches in consult with the fall schools AD, Brian Miller, and Paul Martin, the administrator. Some school properties with an existing MOU could be potentially used for practice venues. We have a number of football fields on school premises that could be potentially used as practice sites. That would be something we would have to consult again with our AD and with the prospective coach hires. It's anticipated the teams would schedule games primarily with teams in surrounding counties. In my discussions with Mr. Russell and Mr. Whitehair, currently Barber, Taylor, Harrison, and Marion have programs in place. A middle school soccer program is permitted to play 14 games annually. We would probably, with the lateness of coming to this, probably look at a more, probably a slate of games, maybe a little less than the max, with this being year one. But obviously, we would work in consult with the hired coach and the AD to make that decision finally. But that's the information I have available for the board at this time, and I would entertain any questions you may have.
You believe that there are practice facilities that are open and not in use currently?
Depending upon the timing, Mr. Kisner. So, for example, our current soccer and football programs, practice immediately after school. So, depending upon their game schedules, there could be potential space here on campus at Preston High School. The field at Kingwood Elementary is potentially an available field. We have fields at Terralta. We have fields at Masontown. We have a field adjacent to Valley. So there are a number of places that we could indicate as prospective, at least practice locations. One thing that I would probably suggest in my discussion with Mr. Miller is, in terms of scheduling games, it may be advisable, for example, when we play home dates, to look at when the high school program has scheduled games and maybe try to schedule in conjunction with those high school dates. Like say, for example, on a Saturday, if you already have the field set up, you may potentially have officials lined up. Sometimes officials may be more inclined to, take on a game if there are, additional games and where they can make more money when they come up to it, to Preston County in particular. So yes, I think we could work it out, but that would be, a consideration we would have to look into very quickly pending board approval.
With the baseball, softball, like when we did it, so it was a similar motion, recommend the development of a middle school baseball, softball. There's currently nothing planned for a follow-up to whether or not we want to continue that for the upcoming season.
I think we could base that based upon program totals. I mean, in some instances, we've had programs where the next year they didn't have sufficient numbers for a team, and the board didn't have to end up paying on that contract. When softball was added, there was one school that had 2 schools feeding that this year was not able to obtain a coach. In that instance, the one thing I do want to convey is just because it's a possibility that a program could be in one part of the county and not in another if the interest level or the ability to get a coach. I mean, I had a cross-country program at South Preston for a number of years where other schools around the county didn't because they didn't have anybody inclined to do it on a volunteer basis. So we would just have to see, obviously, year to year, are the numbers there? Do we have coaches in place? Do we have facilities that could potentially host practice and games? I think that would need to be, take place on an annual basis. But, again, I think to get those programs off the ground, I think we can take a lot of feedback from our parents, from our student athletes, from our coaches, from the AD, to determine if it's advisable for the continuation of these programs from year to year.
Okay. I mean, again, it's kind of tangential to this, but I would like on a future meeting to have a report of how the baseball season went and give an opportunity for communities to speak.
Sure.
I do think that we still did have some practice facility issue conflicts, and I think it would be good for us to hear from the board. Again, kind of tangential to this, but I think on this same subject, if we approve this, I think it would be good to have a plan before a second season to have an opportunity for some of that to see if, to see the repercussions of it. I think more opportunities is great, but there always is a cost, and there are things that get affected that may not be foreseen.
Sure.
Okay, let me jump in here. I think it seems like there's some interest in this. We've got some information from the superintendent. Do we want to go ahead and make this motion and second it? Then we can have discussion moving towards the action.
Yeah, I'll make the motion.
Okay, moved by Mr. Zigray,
Second.
second by Mr. Hovatter. Okay, now let's have further discussion about this specific action. Mr. Zigray?
Well, I mean, we always need feeder teams for our high school. Not saying that's the main reason here, but the reason a lot of our teams have trouble competing sometimes is because they're not starting at a younger age, and the skills and the different plays that are available, they learn. Some kids start in 9th grade, so you're behind already when you're competing. And with the schedule we have, we need every little thing we can get.
So this would be a great feeder.
I think so.
And Mr. Zigray, that was the sentiment expressed by Mr. Whitehair and Mr. Russell, and that's been a similar sentiment in years past when other program requests. I can remember Mr. Lewis was very involved at the advent of middle school volleyball. When you look at softball and baseball, I mean, there were certainly pushes at the high school level from former Coach Pritt, from Coach McNew when we established those programs. So yes, I think that's a huge part of this is the development of potential feeder programs at the school level that can really better align to what's going on at the high school.
So maybe let's maybe talk for a little bit just about the advantages or the pros. So there's a feeder system. Is there any other advantages that we see from this?
I just believe the fact that you can keep the kids involved and keep them occupied and exercising and everything involved with it is just, it's a plus, it's a benefit.
Okay. Are there any disadvantages or cons?
I would say one con, Mr. Tatham, would be, it would have an impact on your concurrent youth soccer programs. It would have an impact there, for sure. I have had discussions with Mrs. Noss, who's been very, very involved with youth soccer in the county. I think we can make that work, and depending upon the length of the season, there may be an opportunity. The one thing that can't be is a child or a student athlete cannot be concurrently participating in a youth sports and a sanctioned WVSSAC concurrently. The youth
same sport, of
of the
soccer.
same sport at the same time. Now, I would say that the youth soccer does have a spring league, which there wouldn't necessarily be conflict there, where the spring league would be unimpeded by a school-based program. But depending upon the length of season as well, there may be some opportunities for some youth soccer games to be tagged on, later in the season. That would be something we would need to be in communication with Mrs. Noss pretty rapidly, though, as we would, work with our coaches, prospective coaches to develop a schedule.
And again, every team you add to any sport, there's only so many resources for practice and game areas. So to me, that's your other thing. Again, I don't know soccer.
sure. No,
It eats
at
into
all.
your other sports as well. A kid may decide, I'm going to play soccer, who would have been an excellent cross-country runner. Now, you can do both, but it's very
Yeah.
challenging for parents and the students.
But I think what Mr. Kisner's saying is not the students, but the physical resources we have.
Yes.
So my question would be, is our administration, the athletic directors, are they committed to making this work that it doesn't negatively impact existing people using the resources?
I've spoken with with Athletic Director Miller, and we're certainly willing to put the due diligence in. Really where you're talking about soccer is competing with the Squires. The Squires location where they would practice. It's location and it's potentially time. I would say if it's a school-owned facility, that a school-based team would take priority over a community-based league. That would obviously, create some issues for some of our community-based sports.
I think that need to be done very delicately.
Sure.
That we don't
Yes.
impact and create bad will from existing. We can't add stuff at the detriment to others. We need to work it out in a way that's mutually beneficial.
No, I understand that, and we certainly, it would not be our goal to say, no, you can't use the facility.
Yeah.
We would try to look at creative ways that we could obviously have the facility used for both community-based sports and school-based sports.
I'd like to talk a little bit about, you mentioned transportation could be available. If we're going to have a unified sport, I personally would like to see that the practice could be done at a time that if you're in an outlying area, Brewston or other areas, that you could get transportation in. Do you feel fairly confident that that's possible, or?
It would depend upon the availability of the hired coach.
But if the coach could do it at a time, the transportation that matched up,
Ideally, we prefer that they practice immediately after school.
and then that transportation would be available at that time.
With the one exception is, and I have to be honest, Aurora, because of their end time and distance, we really don't have a good option of busing coming this direction at the needed time.
Okay.
The other schools we would, but Aurora is because of its location, does make it very
Well, I
challenging.
think it's if there's limitations, as long as we tell the community that in advance and say we know that, so that it's not a change later on. And that's something that we can't make everything perfect, but we can do the best we can to communicate it.
And I would say too, depending upon the coach hired, there could be work, I know the Squires football coach has made a conscious effort to look at, potentially moving the practices around on practices that are on immediately after school, trying to practice in other community locations to again limit travel for, so that it's not always they have to come to Kingwood.
Okay.
We try, I think that's something that's been discussed, and we'd like to see that if that after-school slot is, because again, we're trying to attract a coach on a volunteer basis. It's hard for us to dictate that they'll practice immediately after school if it conflicts, say, for example, with their existing employment.
I understand, but I'm
Yeah.
just looking at it from an equity
Sure.
standpoint. If you live in Reedsville and you're both working parents and your kid wants to be a part of a unified team, transportation county provided sure makes it easier.
Right.
Okay.
So when it was presented by the three gentlemen originally, there was no idea of somebody who was already interested in coaching at that time?
No, they had discussed individuals who were
Okay.
potentially
They had
interested, yes.
individuals that were already interested and whatnot. And do we have any Title IX, like if one gender of it goes and the other one doesn't, do we have any issues in any way?
Not
there?
if we've made a conscious effort to field the team.
Okay.
And that's really been a big process. In fact, like when we established volleyball, a lot of that was based upon Title IX considerations, because we looked at our middle school sports at that time. We offered Squires football, we offered cheer, which was a much smaller number of prospective athletes, and we offered boys and girls cross-country. We felt like the numbers between cheer and football weren't necessarily equitable, so the formation of volleyball definitely, evened that out a bit. But we would, obviously, if we were saying we were only looking to establish a boys program, I think that would create an issue, but if we make a good faith effort to establish programs for both gender, I don't believe that creates any type of.
What if we only find a
schools.
coach for one?
We have to make a good faith effort to try to recruit a coach for both.
So as long as we've made a good faith effort to recruit coaches and recruit players, even if we get the players for one, but we don't have the coach or vice versa or whatever, we're within legal compliance. Okay.
Okay, other comments? Okay, then, let's call the vote.
Voting is open. Motion passes 4-0.
Okay, and I'm assuming, Mr. Martin, since time is probably of the essence for sports, that you'll be announcing this.
We'll have a posting out tomorrow.
Look, the two postings are on this agenda, the two
And we-
coach positions.
We
are-
purposely did that if pending your all's approval, so we could move on the position very
Yeah.
rapidly.
Okay, next on the agenda is, well, first of all, thank you to everyone that was involved in the middle school soccer. And the next is the service personnel. We have an attached personnel agenda. I'll take a motion to approve the service personnel agenda.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Kisner,
Second.
second by Mr. Zigray. Okay, discussion.
The proposed executive session for service personnel matter, would that be advised to be before this vote or
I don't think so.
okay, non-consequential, go ahead.
Okay, any discussion? Okay, hearing none, we'll call the vote to approve the service personnel agenda.
Voting is open. Motion passes 4-0.
Okay, the superintendent has made a recommendation that the board enter into executive session to receive an update on a pending service personnel legal matter. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Kisner,
Second.
second by Mr. Hovatter.
Any discussion?
I'm sorry, is there any discussion? Okay,
Okay. Voting is open. Motion passes 4-0 at 7 o'clock.
thank you. Open session. This will be a voice vote. Is there any discussion? Okay, we'll start with you, Mr. Hovatter.
Yes.
Say it loud.
Yes.
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 and it is 7:15.
Okay, the board took no action, and the superintendent just gave the board members information regarding a pending service personnel legal matter. Okay, next on the agenda is the professional personnel agenda. Is there a motion to approve the professional agenda?
I'll make that motion.
A motion is made by Mr. Zigre,
Second.
seconded by Mr. Kisner. Discussion.
I noticed one of the positions is someone to manage the school store. So kind of tangential just to this. Are we expecting that to open with this school year?
I spoke to Mr. Murray today. He is hopeful to have everything prepared by the start of school. I would anticipate no later than early September.
Okay.
Substantial progress has been made out there. I mean, they're putting walls up, they're pulling cabling in, the required concrete work has been completed. So yes, they're making a lot of progress.
Okay. If we can, as soon as we know a start date, I believe if intents go as planned, like one of the things was for our ag students and students of the school system be able to put things there. If we could make sure as soon as we have any information available to that, or even those estimates are made available to all the ag teachers, so that obviously those students need to know to start ramping that up, especially if on day one we don't want a lot of empty shelf space or only it being PHS products. So if we can just make sure that that's on our radar to get that information over them. Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, is that going to be after school hours too, some?
Potentially both in day and after school, I would.
Good.
Other discussion or questions?
On the school counselor, it says current placement is West Preston. Is this just one position that may travel throughout the county?
All of our schools are county itineraries. We do that so if we need to place them in multiple schools, I have the ability to pull and move them. Their current placement is West Preston.
Okay.
Ms. Varner, can you just explain real quick what itinerant means, just for everyone?
So, county itinerant means that I hire them for the purpose of being able to do something in the county. So all of my nurses are county itinerant, all of the counselors are county itinerant also. Our CISs are county itinerant. So that gives me the ability, if I need to say, I don't have a counselor at school X, and I have two counselors at one school, I can pull them and move them to that school for that day. Or if we had a major trauma that happened at a school, I can pull multiple people and send them all to that school for that day.
Thank you for that explanation. Okay, any other questions, Mr. Zigre, or anything?
Nope.
Okay. Okay, we'll call the vote to approve the professional agenda.
Voting is open. Motion passes 4-0.
Okay, we have an off-site event request from the Brewston School Band. It's recommended that the board approve the Brewston School Band's request to hold a daytime band camp at the Preston County 4-H Camp the week of August 5th to the 9th in 2024. For the public content, the request is made available for the public to see. Is there anything that you want to say about it, Mr. Martin?
No, this is a similar process. Brewston or other schools have requested at times, for example, to host, we'll use cross-country as an example, but I believe Brewston and the Aurora schools have requested the ability to conduct a meet off campus. So this is a little more robust request in the fact that it's a larger number of students involved and for a lengthier period of time, but this is a similar process that we've rolled through. By taking board action, it would cover the school and cover the organization under our Board of Risk Insurance by making sure that it appears on our agenda.
Okay, so Mr. Superintendent has given us some information. Is there a motion to approve this action?
I'll make that motion.
Okay, Mr. Zigre has made the motion,
Second.
seconded by Mr. Kisner. Okay, discussion from board members.
I think it's awesome. Glad they're doing it.
Yes.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay.
Okay.
Anything else? All right, we'll call the vote to approve the Brewston Offsite Band Camp.
Voting is open.
Big thank you to their band boosters
Yeah,
for putting the bill on that.
that's awesome.
Yes.
Yeah. Motion passes 4-0.
Okay. Moving on, the next item on the agenda is the excess levy proposal. A recommendation is being made by the administration that the board approve the excess levy proposal for placement on the November 5th, 2024 ballot. In the public content folder, there is the levy call categories. Mr. Superintendent, do you want to provide information for us?
Yeah, just briefly, board members, the levy committee, of course, it's been 2 to 3 board meetings ago, the board had authorized the levy committee to pursue the possible, to bring forth a proposal for the board's consideration for placement on the November general election ballot. The levy committee has met actually on 3 occasions since that vote. They worked in consult to develop a potential levy call. They provided a number of recommendations. I brought that forth in regards to our central office team for potential review, and brought a proposal back to the levy committee that took into consideration many of the requests in which they had made for adjustment to the levy call. I would say a few things. Let me see if I get that levy call in front of us. Hold on. Somebody have it in their hands. Oh, it's right here. I'm sorry. So the levy call itself, comparative to the levy that was put forth in May, the valuation is no larger, no less. It is at the same valuation mark. However, some of the categories have been reconfigured to a certain extent. The general maintenance category has been untouched. That remains consistent with the previous levy call. Operational expenses, there have been some changes there in the fact that funding for potential service personnel were removed from that particular levy item and moved into a levy category that's listed as classroom teachers, service personnel, and supplemental employees. That particular levy item has increased substantially. I believe it was somewhere in the ballpark of like $900,000. It is substantially larger because, again, we have pulled some of the funding that would be devoted for service personnel positions. And when I say supplemental positions, a few that were mentioned, we've pulled some funding from what was the previous technology category. What this does is it allows the board to be a little more responsive in how they would hire employees. They could look at service personnel needs, professional needs, supplemental needs, and they have it in one category, whereas if you place it in those separate line items, you can only spend it, that's the only thing you could spend it on. So it does provide, I feel like, it allows the board to be more responsive to the needs of our students and staff, compared to the previous proposal. There was a small amount of money that was deducted from health, safety, and security. It was a total of $7,500. I would say that the health, safety, and security is still at a larger line item than our previously passed levy. So we're still devoting more funding there than we have in our previous 5-year past levy. That $7,500 was devoted, if you look to the page 2, one additional category that came forth in our discussions with our committee was consideration to a certain amount of funding to be devoted for event admission for senior citizens and active duty or veterans, or active duty military or veterans. The $7,500 would be structured in a manner that annually up to 125 admission cards that would permit admission to 10 events annually at the high school or at any district school, and that could be for sporting activities, fine arts activities, any paid activity. Those would be valued at those cards would be valued at $60 because there's 10 events. The typical cost associated at the high school is $6. So there would be a process. Obviously, we would make these cards available within our schools, within senior centers. Obviously, we would require documentation of their status as active duty, military, veteran status, or senior citizen. A senior citizen is definitively defined within our levy call as an individual 65 years of age or older. They would need to be a Preston County resident to be eligible for this card. But that was one additional line item that was added to the levy that was not in our previous call. I just want to see if anything else that's of any substantial change. There was an elimination of the technology line item fund. Now, I'm not just saying that we will not continue to devote some funding to technology. The funding that was permitted for technology personnel was moved into the category of classroom teachers, service personnel, and supplemental employees. We spend approximately $35,000 annually on increased bandwidth for our locations. That was actually placed into the operational expenses account. And one thing that would be a part of our levy is if a student damaged their screen on their laptop or iPad, there was funding that was shifted up to $15,000 into the instructional supply and material fund to potentially offset any expenses on that front. So while that category was eliminated, some of that funding was pushed into some of these other additional categories. So this levy call, while there are certainly a lot of similarities to our previous levy call, does have some discernible differences comparative to the levy that was put forth in May. I feel that our committee on a very tight timeline has done a great job of providing, I think, some very viable suggestions to modifications to the potential levy call. And I would just put forth, if there's any questions from the board about the call that's before you, I can certainly try to answer any questions.
Okay, so the superintendent has provided us with verbal information, and the levy call is in the public document. Is there a motion to approve the administration's recommendation to approve the excess levy proposal?
So moved.
Okay, it's moved.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Kisner, seconded by Mr. Zigray. Okay, discussion amongst the board.
The question on the 125, would that be distributed evenly, the senior citizen cards, among the different districts?
No, honestly, Mr. Zigray, it would be basically on a first come, first served basis.
First come, first served, okay.
The reason we set it up in that manner is it was just going to be very hard to track otherwise, and we
Right.
just didn't feel we had, the amount of information to discernibly, we didn't want to overestimate that value. We certainly don't want to underestimate it, but I think, obviously, the one thing about that item too is the schools will have to track, obviously, when an individual uses that card, the school will ultimately have to apply for reimbursement from the county for admission for those matters. But we felt like that was a very good way that we could manage it properly, and we could very easily see how it's being utilized. Obviously, if that's something that is a popular measure, and we see that there's a greater need during the potential, let's say if our levy does pass, and this is seen that it's a popular measure and that we need to, we need more cards than what's been allocated, and that's something we would have to adjust in future levy initiatives.
All right.
Can I make a suggestion on that specifically? So I think if I heard you correctly, you said that the 125 could come from wherever. The call doesn't have to be changed, but I think we may want to do it on a per student basis, that we say, if school A has 10% of the population, we may want to hold 10% of the cards for that school until, if there's no interest, then those cards can be released. But I think the cards should be prorated based on the school students, so that not, maybe if you have school A that's really, really fast in getting the information and they apply for all 125, then that's not creating an equitable situation for other parts of the county.
No, and I certainly would say that we'll allocate a certain number to each school, but there would just need to be a process that those, individuals who are interested in the activity cards to sign up for it. Again, I understand the measure in terms of some type of prorate. I think we would also, again, though, want to make sure that those are available in all areas of the county. What we don't want to do is to require individuals to have to drive into Kingwood, for example, to get cards. We want to make sure that these are readily available in all of our school locations.
Yeah, and if the levy does pass and we do this, just keep the board updated on that
Absolutely.
process.
Yes, sir.
Mrs. Turner is also on our levy committee, and she said that she was going to work with all the senior centers to get like an idea of how many people would be interested in each one of us.
Yeah, that'd be good.
In this interest too, I would say Mrs. Turner was instrumental in bringing forth this as an idea. She'd observed this at work in another county, and again, I think it's a great idea. And again, I applaud the levy committee for, I think, bringing forth some great ideas in a very short timeline for the board's consideration.
Any other comments or questions? Mr. Hobart?
Well, I'm kind of torn on this issue, to be perfectly honest. I've supported the levies in the past. I support this levy. And as important as this is for our school system, I think it's as important to keep the public's vote in mind. And we want their support, no matter what. Now, in the primaries on May 14th, it got beat pretty bad, in my opinion. And I think roughly, 50% of the voters showed up, and it got beat pretty bad. And yes, we've made some changes to the call. How do you anticipate on getting that information out to the public? I think a lot of the issues part of it isn't understood, or it's misunderstood. I think we have a big hurdle, not only after the election, there was some animosity throughout the voters that we have to overcome. To me, I mean, we can run it again in 2026 if we don't run it now. The school bond comes off in 2026. It's no secret that the community, the whole county is struggling. Everybody in the country is struggling right now. I'm just having a hard time deciding whether we give the people a break for a couple of years, and then after the bond comes off, ask for it again, maybe mend some fences that have, per se. And just how do you anticipate overcoming the hurdles of what we have to deal with after the primaries?
I think in terms of the levy meetings thus far, certainly a point to try to develop leadership and capacity within each individual community, someone that relates well within that community. I think the previous levy committee, we made a good faith effort. We visited each school community. We did hour-long forums. We did a large forum in advance of the levy initiative. We maintain a website that had a variety of information in regards to, what was inclusive within the levy, projects that had been paid for with levy funds, a calculator for the average taxpayer to determine their tax liability. So I feel like that the previous initiative, there was certainly effort to try to get information out there. I think this is, I think the mentality of the current committee is a more grassroots approach, again, trying to develop capacity within individual communities and having members of that committee where it's not a singular individual. It doesn't necessarily have to be myself or one of the board members going out and speak to that. We need to make sure that members of the committee who are, deemed in leadership capacities are able to go out and speak confidently about aspects of the levy and answer questions. And for those questions they can't answer, to be able to reach out to individuals within the school district that can assist with those processes. Obviously, beyond that, I just, again, I think that we need to demonstrate that obviously there are needs within the county. This isn't a frivolous request. This is a large potential part of our operating budget. And it does ultimately negatively impact our students in the absence of the levy. And I think that's probably the most important thing to say is there are, we've had to do staff reductions. I think probably first and foremost, that's one of the biggest items that we need to indicate is the number of staff that we ultimately had to impact, as not only as a part of the levy, and obviously there were a variety of reasons, the loss of student enrollment, the ESSER funds. So I can't say that that's strictly levy, but that has certainly contributed to a reduction, the reduction of funding, which hence our number one expense is personnel. The public has said to us repeatedly they want us to be good stewards of the money, and we, through Mrs. Varner's diligent efforts, has made a conscious effort to ensure that we are at or as close to possible at our operating budget as it relates to the funding that is designated for the students of our county. We are right now doing our level best to operate within the budgetary confines that are out there, and I think that's really important to convey to the public is that we're doing the right things. Again, I think particularly as it relates to personnel, because that's by far our highest expenditure rate.
And at the last levy meeting we had last week, can we go on record to say how many jobs that we're looking at potentially riffing because of the levy? We had that discussion.
Yeah, I would say that through the process, now again, it's a combination of the loss of the levy, it's a combination of the loss of student enrollment, and ESSER-funded positions. But Mrs. Varner, as I'm correct, approximately
Can I jump in real
about
quick?
70 positions?
Yeah, by the time you put them all in there together,
Okay.
70, well, by the end it was up to 90, so all the new people we were hiring in from the time of end of February to the end of the school year, we were up to about 90.
Sure.
The new additional admin.
Sorry, Mr.
You're talking
Tiffany.
about what was done in the past, is that,
Mm-hmm.
okay,
Yes.
just clarifying that you're not
Yes.
talking about the future, you're
Right.
talking about the past. That's fine.
Yes.
Okay.
So you say,
I can look from October's child count, from last October's child count to where our numbers are now. And I can pretty well tell you how many we're going to lose until we see how many new enrollees we've gotten. I mean, I can look from October's numbers, I can look to what we have enrolled right now. And I can tell you we're gonna lose pretty well X amount of teachers where we are sitting right now. And then once everyone enrolls in, and we get any new kids in, or how many more we lose out, I can pretty well tell you at that point where we're gonna be sitting.
but that's just,
Before we even get to the October count.
but that's off enrollment. What about just strictly levy-provided jobs?
We have none.
But how many did we lose because it failed? Is what I'm asking, like, potentially. How many people lost their job?
How many positions were covered in the previous levy that expired?
10 professional, 4 point something service, and then two tech-based positions.
And funding for a police officer?
Correct.
I just want to get that out there.
What communication can be done with school employees and parents directly from the school system, from an informational standpoint, not a promotion of the levy, but just an informational standpoint of what the levy provides? Because I agree, I understand Mr. Kisner's concerns. I mean, running a levy during a general election is going to be even more difficult, challenging than a primary, because you have twice as many voters and you have to get 50% plus one of those. And having worked on the previous campaign, I understand the amount of work and the challenge that it's going to take. And I think it's going to take a grassroots approach, but I think we also have to directly talk to every single person that is impacted by the school system, and that's our parents, the students, the parents of our students, and our employees. So can the administration, what can the school system do to communicate information about the levy?
We're able to communicate, for example, with our employee groups. We addressed our community groups to provide, again, like you said, we have to be very careful in the fact we're providing factual information. How has the levy influenced or impacted the district? What we cannot do is to try to use influence to say, well, you all need to vote for this.
Yeah,
levy.
I understand that. We can't say you need to do it, but we can say that just informational, if you have a levy, it provides 2 positions at this school and
Sure.
5 positions at this school, or it funds roof repairs, et cetera.
Right. Well, we've met with employee groups during the last. We certainly would do that again. It may not be, and maybe in terms of the delivery, that doesn't necessarily need to come from me. I mean, we can look at the other opportunities for individuals to address our employee groups if that's felt to be the best approach.
Mr. Kisner? Mr. Zigray?
Nope.
Okay, any other discussion? Mr. Hovatter? Okay, then we'll call the vote on the recommendation that the board approve the excess levy proposal for placement on the November 5th, 2024 ballot.
Voting is open. Motion passes 3-1.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is a school closure update related to Fellowsville and Rollsburg for the 2025 and 2026 academic year. This is a discussion and informational item, so I'll ask the superintendent to give information on it first, and then we'll have discussion.
Just one minute, Mr. Takey. Papers are getting all over.
And I will also point out for the public that the policy document is in the public file regarding this process.
Just to update Mr. Tatham, during the May 28th meeting, of course, that was prior to Mr. Hovatter and Mrs. Miller being placed on the board. The board approved myself to explore options related to the possible closure at Fellows,ville and/or Rollsburg schools, and to report back this information to the board. The request was made due to the large decrease that has been seen in enrollment at both schools over the last 5 years. Building capacity levels available for potential district schools to receive students from these schools. And I would like to note that the current enrollment at Rollsburg as in the WEBA system is at 34 students in grades K through 8. In grades K, in enrollment at Fellows,ville is at 74 in grades pre-K through 4. Obviously, at those numbers, the building capacity levels of both district schools are below 20%. The potential schools of receivership, in assessing those numbers, would certainly be able to receive prospective students from each of these schools, if that is a decision that would ultimately be made. It should be noted that the district's comprehensive educational plan that was completed in 2020 identified the potential closure of both of these schools in years 5 through 10 of the plan, which would be in 2025 through 2030. Again, the recommendation in this instance is for the 2025-2026 school year. The procedures or process involved in the school closure process are specified with the Department of Ed Policy 6204. School closings or consolidations, as Mr. Tatham alluded to, that policy has been provided in the board packet in the public section for review. Just to quickly review kind of the procedural processes that would be involved if this is ultimately the decision of myself and the board. One major requirement associated with Policy 6204 is the preparation and submission of an impact statement and supporting data concerning proposed school closures or consolidations. The statement must be available for public review at least 30 days in advance of any scheduled public hearings and delivered in duplicate to the principal and local school improvement chairs of any school proposed for closure, and the delivery of the impact statement at least 10 days prior to the period of public posting needs to be made to the West Virginia Department of Education. Within that document, the following measures have to be included. Relates to enrollment trends, facilities, finances, personnel, student transportation, and community impact. Tonight, I would like to formally advise the board that it is my intent to complete the required impact statement and bring a proposal for the board's review of the potential closure of both Fellows,ville and Rollsburg for the 25-26 school year. I hope to bring this presentation by late August to early September. In reviewing the previous closing processes, this process was begun on September 24th at a scheduled meeting at South Preston in 2018. The process must be completed by December 30th, 2024, but must be approved by the West Virginia State Board during a scheduled meeting in advance of the 12/30/24 deadline. So again, board members, there's a procedural process that if we were to pursue this, would need to be brought forth for a review. I am hopeful that within the next month to bring that before you for your all's consideration. I would just simply say this measure is being pursued as a matter of fiscal responsibility, is in line with the district's CEFP plan, and a recommendation would be carried out with the board's approval regardless of the outcome of the levy. I think it's very important to indicate that, last time that those two issues became very much entangled. We got to a point, when the closure process came to a vote, a decision was made by previous boards to put forth a levy initiative that was passed in February of 2019. That levy went out in June 30th of this year. But I would say this, this is a difficult process in terms of trying to promote a levy and potentially close schools concurrently. But we do feel that at this point it is in line with our plans, and it is a necessary step to demonstrate fiscal responsibility throughout the county. So that's, I would put forth any questions the board would have at this juncture, Mr. Tatham.
Okay. Again, there's no action on this tonight. This is for discussion. Mr. Kisner?
Part of it should have been done last year. Other than that, we got to move forward.
Okay. Mr. Hovatter? Mr. Zigray?
What were the beginning numbers? that you gave us at the beginning?
In terms of the current enrollments? Give me 1 second, Mr. Zigray. I believe it rolls.
34 and
34 and 70.
74.
74.
Okay.
Now, I would like to note one thing about Fellows,ville specifically. Fellows,ville's enrollment has been negatively impacted in the fact that a grade level was removed from consideration at the school back in, that was when Mr. Watering was still, and I don't remember the exact year. But obviously, that does have an impact on the overall enrollment numbers at that school if you look at that school comparatively over time. I think that's important to, that is an important point to make. That would be something that obviously would be brought forth in the document, the procedural document that was described to you earlier.
Okay, anything else?
No.
Okay, we'll move on then to the next item, the superintendent's report.
Good. Board members, in your packets, I had a loose sheet. I forgot to include this in my section. It's got a couple color photos. We'll bring that up at the end. Board members, I would like to report I'm currently working with Mrs. McDonald and Mrs. Layton to establish the upcoming board date, to hold work sessions for board members to be updated by some of the participants at the Model Schools and Visual Learning Conferences that were attended this summer. Board members, for your review, I have actually uploaded a link to 2 presentations made by county staff at the Model Schools. The first one was conducted by former staff member Ashley Nally and Kelly Murray. The other one was by Samantha Peasley and several members of the Kingwood Elementary staff. I will say that I have handwritten the username and credentials in your application or in your agenda packets because when you click on that link, it's going to request a username and pass. You can utilize what I've written in there on that, in the executive content on your agendas if you'd like to watch. The presentations are approximately an hour. So if you'd like to watch, kind of how our county staff was able to shine at the Model Schools Conference, I would certainly encourage you to watch both. I think both of our groups did a tremendous job in presenting at the conference. Board members, I would like to update you. Dan Neal, 304 Fencing, has completed fencing projects at PHS, Fellows,ville, and Central Preston. In addition, crews have also installed required hand railing at the PHS track and field complex that runs alongside the new paving path that leads up to the additional seating that was installed last year at the stadium as a result of funding from the John W. Trenton Benevolent Trust. Substantial completion of the PHS secure entryway and exterior door project is now scheduled for August 6th. I have completed a walkthrough with Representative Thrasher to identify known issues that need to be addressed in advance of the scheduled 8/7 final walkthrough. We also have a vendor, Electronic Specialties, will be meeting with the electricity subcontractor to address some door access issues. Right now, I believe we only have 2 of the door access doors that have been reinstated at this time, so we're looking to try to expedite that process as well. Mr. Murray is working to ensure substantial completion of the CT retail store that was referenced by Mr. Kisner earlier in the meeting. For the start of school, updates will continue until this project is completed. The appeal regarding Preston High School's status as a Quad A versus AAA school for athletic purposes continues on. I would normally tell you, I would have thought maybe I forgot to take this out of the agenda. No, I'm going to another meeting this week. I have been to Parkersburg twice, and this will be my second trip to Charleston this week. I'll be joined by Mr. Jennings and possibly Mr. Seymour has some professional development conflicts, so we'll have to determine if he's going to be able to join us as well. We continue to make the point that for the sake of competitive balance, that we feel that Preston and a number of other schools have been, improperly placed in terms of classification status for the upcoming athletic seasons. I did want to update the board. The Culinary Arts and Wellness Camp started today at PHS in Central Preston for students in 5 through 8. They'll run through the end of the week. I think there was a lot of excitement about these camps. I think we had good participation levels at both, so we're very, that's been an option for our middle school students during the summer to add to the summer school services for elementary and high school students. Summer reading programs at Aurora West, Terrata, Brewston, and PHS have also will continue through July 31st of this month. The levy committee, obviously based upon tonight's vote, will be scheduled to meet on August 6th at 6 p.m. here in the boardroom to discuss. They'll be tasked with promoting the levy call. Obviously, I'll be working with Mrs. Kerstetter to make sure that we have that document submitted in the proper format to Mrs. Huggins for placement on the November ballot. That must take place before August 14th. Mrs. McDonald, I believe, has worked with Qualtrics to get usernames and passwords established for each member of the board so that you have an opportunity to review some of the end-of-year survey that was completed by teachers, staff, parents, and students. I would definitely encourage you board members to check that out. I think there's a lot of really good information to be derived from that. Upon receipt of all self-appraisal documents, the board members from board members serving during the 23-24 academic year. So Mr. Hovat, you and Mrs. Miller were not required to complete these self-appraisals at this point. That'll be a process that'll be rolled out in later portions of this year. But I have attached, board members, the compilation of the self-appraisal responses from all of our 5 board members from last year. That document has been emailed to Stacy Morrell with the Department of Ed in line with code and has been placed on the Preston County Board of Education website for review by the public at the website that's listed in your agenda. Our next board meeting is scheduled for Monday, August 12th at 6 p.m. However, I would like to formally request permission to schedule a special meeting on August 5th at a time to be determined by the board that would include just a personnel agenda for both service and professional employees. This will assist in Mrs. Varner getting needed positions filled in advance of the academic year. So, Mr. Tatham, I would just open to see if that date is amicable for a quorum of the board members and to determine a potential time so I could get that publicly advertised. Oh, one other thing before I move on. Just as a separate document, I just wanted to commend our boys basketball coach, Bucky Forbes, along with a number of members of the community, members of his playing staff, coaching staff, were able to get together this past Saturday to work on making general improvements at the auxiliary gym and main gyms at Preston High School. Did a tremendous amount of work and certainly wanted to applaud all of those who participated in those activities. Mr. Tatham, I would just open up to the board's willingness to entertain a meeting on the 5th.
Okay, so let's do that first, and then we'll go to general questions for the superintendent. So the request has been made that we have a special meeting on August 5th. I will say that I will be out of town that day, so Mr. Kisner, if you're available, are you available that day? We'll start with that on August 5th.
That will be fine, and I'm fine with either an evening meeting, if it's
Just really whatever the board prefers.
Well, but I was just saying, if it's just a personnel agenda, well, again, I'm totally open that day for an evening meeting if that would work for the rest of the board.
That's fine.
Or an early morning. If you guys wanted to do one at like 7 o'clock, 7:30 in the morning, I would be fine with that.
Whatever your preference. we
Mr.
can work
Hovat, are
with.
you open?
I'm open.
Anytime preference? You're open anytime, Mr. Zigray?
Yes.
Anytime preference?
Yep, anytime.
Anytime you're open on the 5th? Okay, so Kisner wants you.
Are you guys open to like a 7:30? Like,
Yeah,
can we-
7:30.
It's a
Good.
simple thing and it's done for the day. Like,
If you all are inclined to that, we could definitely establish an early morning meeting. We'll make sure that the media is notified of that. But again, it's just going to be a singular item. Service personnel, professional personnel will be the only thing included on that agenda. So,
I'm fine with that. I don't believe that we need an official motion to set a meeting, but if you would like one, we can do one. But I personally am fine with just proposing.
I'll message Mrs. Miller, but we'll indicate 7:30, and it appears we would at least have a quorum who would be available. So,
Okay.
thank you all, board members. Appreciate that.
Okay, any other questions for the superintendent?
I would just like to take this opportunity as a point of personal privilege in that Preston High has a new state secretary in the state FFA. Elizabeth Hauser was voted into that place, so just congratulations to one of our students, and again, representing our school and our FFA and ag program, so.
And Mr. Kisner, I've reached out to Mr. Hauser to see if we could schedule a time. He said August would be tough. He would probably prefer if we would recognize the students and staff involved once we get back to school.
And that's what I assumed. I just thought we'd go ahead and point it out, congratulate her.
absolutely.
And
It's awesome.
I think it's a pretty awesome second time in a very short order, so. The survey stuff that we got access to, would there be other is there anything that surveys would be conducted on that we wouldn't be able to see? Like, I think we only have access to just one survey right now, but I think a lot of that data could be beneficial for us to see. I don't know what your thoughts are on that. I don't know what all surveys are even in that
That's the only
system
thing
already.
that's the only
That's the
thing
only
we've
thing we've used it
utilized
for
thus
so
far
far.
with
Okay.
Qualtrics. We were able to get that system online late in the year. Really, we would have preferred to establish that. I mean, it'll be in our plans this year to run that survey much earlier in the
Yeah.
instructional year.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Mr. Ziegler, any questions?
Nope, no question.
Okay, let's move on then. Next, we have Preston County Schools Policy R8-39-9 for retired teachers as substitutes in areas of critical need. Do you want to give information on it first, and then we'll get a motion? Do you want to give any information?
Certainly, this policy, we have typically refined or modified this policy on an annual basis to assess, what positions would be deemed a critical need area for us. By establishing this policy, it allows for retired employees who are potentially certified for said positions to be able to sub in those positions above and beyond the 140 days that they're typically limited to after retiring. Mrs. Varner, is there anything else that you'd want to add beyond that?
No, it just, if they retire, usually you cannot work more than 139 days without your retirement being hit. And as long as we apply for this and you guys approve it, next minute into the state gets on their agenda. And if we have retired teachers in the positions that we highlight as critical need, and they can work over the 140 days, and retirement is not affected.
Ms. Varner, let's say, for example, that we see a need that establishes a month and a half or 2 months from now. Could we bring this policy back for the board's review and make adjustments if necessary?
Yes, we can amend it throughout the year.
Okay, so the superintendent administration has provided information. Is there a motion to approve the changes and approve policy 839-9 on first read?
Yes, I'll make that motion.
Okay, Mr. Ziegler has made the motion.
I'll second.
Mr. Hovatter has seconded. Discussion amongst the board.
We're hurting in elementary as well as other areas.
Millersburg K4, I have a hard time filling that position, and we thankfully have Mrs. First who jumps right in.
And Janice.
Okay, thank you.
Just to clarify, this is the same one that we did last year. We're just updating the dates, right?
Updating the dates, and I've added speech language pathologist because we have a retired speech language who is interested in coming back and she's able to work beyond her days this year. So I've added that as a position for this year in there.
And Mrs. Varner, in doing so, that's probably more cost efficient than some of the contracted services we would have to utilize otherwise.
Good.
Any questions? Discussion? Okay, hearing none, I'll call the vote for the recommendation to approve on first read.
Voting is open. Motion passes 4-0.
Okay, the next item on the agenda we've already done. We had discussion but no action. So now we are under curriculum and instruction. There's a recommendation that the board approve the Universal Pre-K MOU between Preston County Schools and North Central West Virginia Community Action Association Incorporated, also known as Head Start Program. Do we want to provide information on it first?
Mr. Tatham, yes, this is an annual document. It's a requirement with our relationship with Head Start to establish a MOU or Memorandum of Understanding. I've asked Mrs. Miller to be present this evening to potentially handle any questions that I'm not able to answer as well. So, again, this document, I know one concern last year is that this document was brought forth with very little time in advance of the school year. So Mrs. Miller has been diligently requesting a status update on the MOU in order to get this before the board in a timely manner. So thank you for your efforts on that front, Mrs. Miller.
I know we'd had discussion about in previous years and we'd requested some information, but I forget now exactly where we ended and what changes. Can you update me on wasn't there a committee did you work on that committee, Mr. Kisner, about
To my knowledge,
the collaboration team, I think it was called?
they have, the collaborative team was not able to meet, but they were able to come to an agreement about changes of the priority order in which students were considered.
Well, and I don't anticipate any changes with it for next year. The criteria sheet you use to determine what students will get into what schools. For this year, we did make a change on that application that we would look at in-area children first for that area, so. And then there's a list of criteria you use to determine that. So this particular year, I mean, we don't have any issues with, our numbers are, the only school that's even full right now is Terrata. Nobody else is even full, so it hasn't affected anybody at all this year. So only years that you have certain areas that would, if they would happen to be full, would that become.
Just to clarify, that's a change we're trying to get pushed for the future, right? But we've not gotten is the in area approved?
Yeah, it's approved. We
Okay.
did that for this year.
Thank you.
Mrs. Miller, one thing I think we would want to add, maybe a substantial change from the previous year MOU, is the fact that we're no longer, one of the partner organizations was previously Little Bear, and that is no longer the case. Am I correct in that?
You're correct, but that's a separate MOU. So you're required to have one collaborative partner, and we had two. We had Head Start and Little Bear. Little Bear will not be in business at the beginning, starting to be, I think, August. So we won't have a collaborative partner.
But we're compliant in the fact that we
Yeah,
have a
we're
relationship with Head
compliant.
Start. Okay. I thought that was while it's not directly in this MOU, I thought it was a notable change to advise
Yeah.
the board about.
So there are some changes throughout the MOU, but it was, the West Virginia Department of Education made recommendations for us to look at this MOU. The Head Start had a lot of information in it that was outdated. So they've removed all those policies. But other than that, it pretty much is, it's pretty much the same. It has been for years, so.
Okay, and I'm probably the one that jumped it, but before we get into more discussion with the board, can we go ahead and get a motion to approve this action?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Okay, Mr. Zigre,
Second.
and seconded by Mr. Kisner. Okay, now let's have discussion.
So just in summation, Ms. Miller, and I'm sorry, sometimes I'm slow, but just to make sure that we're on the same page. Nothing is changing with the upcoming school year as far as that criteria sheet, the whatever you refer to it as with your title.
If we were going to make a change in it, I'll bring it to the board and
Yeah.
let you know.
Okay, so nothing's changed with that, and with this MOU, you're saying no substantial changes. There were some
No.
policies that were referred to that were inactive, but essentially this MOU is the same as the one that we approved last year. Nothing of any of
Right.
magnitude as far as you're considering. Thank you very
Yeah.
much. Appreciate you being here.
Any other discussion? Okay, then I'll call the vote for the recommendation to approve the MOU between Preston County Schools and North Central West Virginia Community Action Head Start.
Voting is open. Ms. Varner, can you kill that mic up there if it's not already? Motion passes 4-0.
The next item on our agenda is a recommendation from the administration that the board approve the memorandum of understanding between Preston County Schools and Mountaineer Challenge Academy for GED services. There is a document in the public file, but Mr. Superintendent, do you want to give us any information on it?
This is just an agreement to enter into to assist with required GED testing services. We do have an established testing site now at Preston High School in conjunction with Mr. Bailey's program, Option Pathway. But we have to have a certified instructor to carry out any GED testing. So this is an agreement to enter into with Mrs. Bright, who's the HiSAT GED evaluator that would be utilized here at Preston High School.
Okay, Mr. Superintendent has provided information. Is there a motion to approve this MOU?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Kisner, seconded by Mr. Zigre. Discussion amongst the board?
Is this something we do every year?
Yes, we're required to have this every year, and again, we've had to do some additional work over there with the lab this year in terms of meeting full certification status, but no, this is typically an annual MOU, Mr. Hobetter.
And also, these are cadets at the Challenge Academy that have become students of Preston County Schools? technically, or no? Or they're just cadets?
No, I mean, there could be Preston High School students there, but there would be a blend of students from a variety of other districts. We have students that are coming from the Challenge Academy as well, who are receiving, doing coursework in welding and, what is it, Mr. Varner? They're working with Mr. Varner in animal processing and nursing as well.
And these are also Mr. Bailey's option pathway students that are our students that aren't even Challenge Academy. These are our Preston High students that are taking the GED test and
Okay.
that are taking our vocational. She comes up and tests our students also.
What's the cost usually on doing this for the
Honestly, Mr.
non-students?
Hovatt, I don't know. I can certainly try to drive that number to see what's typically paid out on this contract annually.
And when it says up to 8 students per occurrence, is that per session for them to get the GED?
The lab
Or we
is
have-
established with 8 certified testing. The testing center has 8 stations that are certified, so that's just the highest number we could test at one particular setting.
But the portion for the Mountaineer Challenge Academy students is reimbursed.
Yeah, I
from
believe-
Mountaineer Challenge Academy.
we would
Like,
ult-
we
we
only
would
incur
ultimately
the
bill-
expense for our students that are
Okay,
going
that
through
was
the
another
option
question.
pathway.
Correct.
The stuff that's for the MCA, we get reimbursed.
Correct.
Okay.
Anything further? Mr. Zigray?
Nope.
Okay, so we have a motion that's been seconded to approve, I'll call the vote to approve the MOU between Preston County Schools and Mountaineer Challenge Academy for GED services.
Voting is open. Motion passes 4-0.
Okay, next, there is no educational leave. There are no out-of-state field trips. The next item on the agenda is to approve the chaperone list. It is recommended that the board approve the attached chaperone list for summer school. There is a document in the public folder, then there's additional administrative content. Did you want to provide any information?
Sure,
or
Mr. Tatham.
recap?
Obviously, this has been a point of discussion over our last few meetings. The required policy-based form from R10-13-9 is included. We have a series of chaperones from each of the three of the 4 summer school placements are requesting for chaperones to attend the scheduled trip at the end of the program, which will be going to the Clarksburg Splash Zone. Those marked in yellow, again, I physically have in hand the disclosure documents of the students from Kingwood and Terralta, and I have a statement from the site coordinator at West that she physically has in hands the disclosure statements for the chaperones at the West Preston School for this. So obviously, for future, and again, one thing we've talked about is obviously I will ensure that our schools moving forward adhere to the confines of the policy. I also have an assurance statement from the summer school representative, Mrs. Edmonds, that each of these individuals have been cross-reference checked against the state sex offender list as per our current policies. So we've adhered to all the current policies in regards to our review against the sex offender list. Each of the individuals who are being proposed before you have submitted a disclosure statement with all indicating as no, that they have not had any legal infractions, nor are they currently under no pending charges as a result. So that's all I have at this time, Mr. Tatum.
Okay, so you have information on it. Can I get a recommendation to approve, can I get a motion to approve the chaperone list?
So moved.
Okay, moved by Mr. Kisner,
Second.
second by Mr. Hovatter. Okay, discussion amongst the board? Not hearing any? Okay, I call the vote that we approve the attached chaperone list for summer school.
Voting is open. Motion passes 4-0. Board members, I would indicate too, from the original submitted list, we did remove some chaperones and the fact that they did not get the required paperwork turned in within a timely manner. So, again, that'll be something we will work with our schools so that we are very much in line with our current policies. And if those policies are to be modified down the line, we'll ensure that those are being properly followed.
Thank you. Thank you. And I know she's not here, but just again, thank you to Mrs. Alexander for bringing this matter to our attention so that we can make ourselves even better. Okay, next on the agenda is the professional meeting. There's no meetings submitted for this, so we'll move on to the ongoing literacy discussion. This is a discussion information item.
Mr. Tatham, just to reiterate, we have a number of staff members who will be attending the Invest Conference in Morgantown this week. There's more than 700 educators from around the state who'll be attending. We have 40-plus from Preston County schools, with some going to sessions at the Waterfront Place in Morgantown, others at Morgantown High School in regards to recent math adoption. Experts will deliver unique learning sessions, and the Department of Ed will offer updates on various initiatives, state codes, and West Virginia Board of Education policies. Again, math teachers will be convening at Morgantown High to learn more about the new mathematics standards going into effect this school year. Again, we have a large contingent going. I'm sure Mrs. Bomar, I believe you're going this week as part of our literacy team. Mr. Seymour, you're slated to go as well. So appreciate your all's efforts in attending those conferences as well, and to be able to bring back great information for our staff. Mrs. McDonald also reported out that the county first and second grade teachers and aides attended a training last week that worked in conjunction with some of our academic coach team, involved changes to the report cards, and further work on academic scope and sequence for the coming academic year. So at this point, that's all I have is related to the early literacy, or ongoing literacy discussion.
Okay. Is there any questions or discussion?
Ms. Varner, do we have very many first or second grade openings across the county? Yeah.
You.
And Ms. Varner, you may want to, I don't know if you need a mic or speak really loud too.
I have one at West, a first grade opening at West. And I think that is, we have a K-4 opening at Rollsburg.
Yeah.
And I think that is it for
Okay.
1 and 2.
Again, I know we got to do so many things proactive. I don't know how much of that gets taken into consideration for
They
that,
have
just since.
applicants, they're interviewing, that one at West came in late, so they just received their applicants. And then the K-4, it's been an ongoing, we send them, and the people who were on their list have accepted one grade positions at other places throughout the county.
Yeah.
Which then we end up reposting the K-4 again.
Yeah. Hopefully the K-4, again, since we're hopefully going to have a retired teacher coming back into that, was given an opportunity to go to that. I don't know, like whether as far as Ms. McDonald would have had her name and contact information or not to have invited her to this training, since it will affect her. But anyways, nothing further.
Okay, any other comments? Nope. Okay, we will move on then to finance and the action item of approving contracts reviews as per policy 8200. There's a recommendation from the administration that the board approve purchase order number 2500118 for A+ Consulting for a total for teacher and academic coach professional development related to science of reading at all district schools, along with additional training for academic coaches and tutors. Purchase order number 2500114 for Curriculum Associates Incorporated for iReady assessment and associated learning tools for the 2024-2025 academic year, and the proposal from Stansberry Uniforms LLC for band uniforms for Preston High School. We'll take this motion as all together as a consent for all three. If anyone wants to separate them out, then you can make that motion. Mr. Martin has put several documents in the public content file of a copy of all the POs for the public to see in background and backup information for all of those. Mr. Martin, do you want to provide any information at this time?
Yeah, Mr. Tate, the only thing I think I was missing, I do have a sole source letter for Curriculum Associates as it relates to iReady. But no, I would say a few things. You know, I feel like that the A+ literacy, I think there's been a very definitive plan laid out. Again, sole source document has been provided in terms of any bidding requirement issues. And, you know, I feel like that I hope that I've supplied you all with sufficient information related to, you know, the context of the work that was going to be done in association with that contract. With the contract with the Curriculum and Associates, we have utilized iReady for the last several years, and it is currently we're required to maintain a program to do screening, particularly for things such as dyslexia. So that is the program that we monitor student progress as well. So again, that's been an ongoing rollover contract, but again, because of the valuation, I brought it before the board for their review. In terms of the uniform costs, those are associated uniforms with Preston High School. The funding source is ESSER, and these are being purchased through a cooperative purchasing agreement. So again, I've tried to provide all the pertinent information related to these expenditures. I did also indicate within the agenda item some large checks that will be coming through that have been previously approved by the board at previous meetings.
Okay, so the superintendent has provided information. Is there a motion to approve this action?
So moved.
Okay, moved by Mr. Kisner,
Second.
second by Mr. Hovatter. Okay, so we can take board discussion amongst these. Just for background information for the board and for the public, so policy 8200 requires the board to approve any contracts that are greater than $100,000. As Mr. Martin said, if it's a sole source vendor, we do not have to put that out to bid because the vendor is the only one that can provide it. So let's first start with A+ Consulting. Is there any discussion about that purchase order?
So, Mr. Martin, I mean, you don't have any, what exactly makes what this company does so unique that there, I mean, certainly there have got to be other companies out there that do consulting on literacy. I mean, do you not have any concerns about the stipulation? I mean, again, she can say, my services are unique because of my experience and my whatever, but I mean, I just don't know what responsibility we have in vetting. Is there really a competitor out there of some nature?
And I think moving forward, Mr. Kisner, one thing that we may have to do on this front is in years past, we have used that sole source document. A way that we can ensure total compliance would be to put a posting, for example, on a website or local newspaper. Now, the problem you run into is there's not a lot of ed consultants who are, this is no offense, Jacob, to the Preston County Journal, but in terms of, I don't know that sometimes that's going to reach the audience that it's, even though it's a, I hope you understand, Jacob, that is, even on our website, I mean, I think that's helpful, but that could be another procedural step if that's the will of the board, that we could look to post those in a manner to elicit potential additional bids. We can also send out bid requests to specific vendors that may do similar work while it might not be, that's where you get into a little gray area in the fact that, yes, she has certain expertise that maybe other bidders don't, or she does things a certain way. But right now, I would say is that, a procedural step moving forward that we could do is to seek out bids for services of this nature moving forward, and we can certainly do that if that's requested by the board.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to add more fluff to anything. She added an awful lot of adjectives in order to get to the point of being able to say, no one else compares, right? I mean, education, experience, knowledge, flexibility, district needs, and training experience. I mean, when it takes 6 items to say this is my differentiation, I get concerned about how different you are to even what Icicle may, or I'm sorry, I said that wrong. But ICLE might say like, hey, we could have offered things in that competing nature. And again, I don't know our responsibility. If you are comfortable in things, if this letter is our legal protection that we feel like we've got it, then I'm fine with that.
I think moving forward, though, that it would probably be advisable to, seek things above and beyond the sole source level.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think we could probably like use an RFQ type of a thing of like, we kind of decide what exactly we're looking for, what our goals are, and really work on that this year for the following year.
Yep,
Because it probably
absolutely.
would take a year to get that off.
Well, no, I think
the list.
moving forward, we can put an RFP out for services of this nature. I would say that Dr. Taylor has had, an ongoing, working relationship with some of our staff. And I think that can sometimes be considered, if you're assessing proposals, for example, that can be a rubric item. When you're reviewing projects, the criterion, you must look at cost first and foremost, but that is not the only consideration that can play in. And the rubric itself, while cost must be the top rated criterion, there can be other criteria that it puts forth that may put a vendor who maybe bids at a higher rate can still be the acceptable vendor in circumstances.
Yeah. Well, and again, and I don't know how many years back we go with this. I know that our most recent 5-year is a hard history because there's been outliers into things that have affected our performance. But the fact that we've worked with somebody in the past, if we're not seeing improvement, then
Sure.
there may be a need for a change. Just
Absolutely.
what is comfortable may not be what is beneficial. So,
Understood.
But
Understood.
anyways, you're aware of that more than I am. Regarding I'm sorry, you were going to do this one by one, so go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with Mr. Kisner that we should look at it, and I think we should look at our literacy rates and with that, now that we're getting some better data, and start making that decision. Is there additional conversation about A+ literacy? Mr. Ziegler? Okay, so let's move then on to curriculum associates. Mr. Kisner?
I don't believe I have anything regarding them.
Okay, so this is the iReady, just for Mr. Hovatter's benefit and the public. iReady has been approved by the board. Mr. Hovatter, the iReady has been approved by the board, and it has been, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but all of our school curriculum teams have recommended its
That's correct.
use. And we are required to have an assessment tool by the states. We have to use something. There is other parts of iReady that goes beyond that, as far as like providing.
In our elementary math, textbook series does align with iReady as well, with it being Ready Math.
Mr. McCrone? So is there any questions or comments about the curriculum associates?
So I'm sorry, in regards to the iReady item, I mean, again, I'm assuming that the per school thing is obviously costing us way more than if we were doing per student. Did we request being able, I mean,
It's just how they structure their.
I mean,
their
obviously
contracts.
it's beneficial to them to give us a group of under 200 where we pay the same amount for 162 as 120 as 80 as if we were to have 199. It just seems like I didn't go through the math, but I mean, we're substantially paying for hundreds more students because of the way they're doing it.
Structured.
I don't know if we had the opportunity to push back on that or not. Again, anytime somebody wants to do a range, it's normally to their benefit because they're gonna max the cost at the higher end of what that number of range is, whereas we definitely have several that are in the lower percentile.
What I have found, Mr. Kisner, in my review of programs of this nature is they'll give you a per student expenditure, but they'll rate it at a
They'll make it
level
so
where they're
high.
still gonna make their money, they'll make it one way or the other. They're gonna make it on the way they structure it. If you wanna go a different route, they'll just increase the per pupil cost basis. Now, there may be instances where if we were looking selectively at a singular location that we want, it might be advisable, but at the district level, this is the most cost-efficient manner for this particular program. That's my understanding, that if we went on a per pupil, we would end up paying as much or more.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions about iReady? Mr. Hovatter? Nope. Okay, next, band uniforms. I believe you explained it, but just to clarify, the money that's budgeted for this and being used is ESSER, the federal money? Is that correct?
That's correct. And that must be exhausted or encumbered by September 30th.
The current band uniforms that we have, is that what was purchased whenever the high school was created?
And to my knowledge, those are original to the school, so those are, upwards of 30 years old.
That was one of the questions I had.
Yeah.
And the second question, you said it was co-opt. So usually with co-op, you get a little bit of a discount, but there's no reflection of
Well,
that.
Mr. Hogarth, I would say this, it meets the thresholds if we were to be audited in the fact that it is a pre-bid, that this is a pre-bid process that meets the bidding requirements for that. I can't say that in every instance that is the lowest cost alternative. I mean, I just want, to be as transparent as I can.
Okay.
But for example, if we were to be audited by like through any type of federal audit, when you can supply that it was done so with we do that a lot with tech expenditures. There's a state contract that we can purchase from. It's a singular. The Zones holds one, a company called Zones holds one contract, and Advantage Tech holds the other contract. When we make purchases from those two vendors, it meets the legal requirements in terms of what we have to do from a bid standpoint. However, it is not always it's not always the most cost-efficient endeavor.
Okay.
Like, we actually had a situation with the State Department where it was cited as an issue, even though we saved hundreds of thousands of dollars through the processes that we took, because we didn't pursue it through the state bid contract. But it is what it is.
I understand.
Okay, other comments or questions about band uniforms?
Nope.
Okay, then hearing none, I call the vote on the recommendation that we approve the 2 purchase orders and the 1 proposal.
So moved.
So I'm just calling the vote.
I was going to say, I think we already had Mr. Kisner and Mr. Hogarth. Yes, sir.
I'm like, swear we already did that.
Voting is open. Motion passes 4-0.
Okay, next on the agenda is phone system proposal. This is discussion and information. I'll ask the superintendent to give us a recap here in a second, but for the public, there is information from Mr. Sines, and there's a lot of documents provided that the public can review and board members to review. Mr. Martin, do you want to give us a recap?
Sure. Mr. Sines has been investigating, looking at updating our phone system services. The proposals that have been put forth will allow for example, I think some of the advantageous elements. We would be basically in line with our current cost basis. Now, there will be some upfront. It's about $1,000 set up on the front end. So we'll see a slight increase on the front end, but the year-to-year cost of this proposal keeps us in line with our current phone expenditures with Frontier Communications. Frontier Communications, we're using traditional phone lines. These would be voice over IP lines. We would be leasing equipment from the vendor. But again, that would keep us within the current price point. This would allow us to have phone services in all district classrooms. We could have a manner of interconnecting between schools. The one thing that's a little bit different is traditionally our schools that have voice over IP systems are on a 3-digit extension system. This would push us to a 4-digit extension. Mr. Sines would plan, for example, that each school would have a designated starting number, and then typically the other 3 numbers would be associated with the specific classroom in which the phone would be placed. This would also give us functionality in the fact that in an emergency situation, I could do an all-call to every school location by dialing a singular extension and could speak with, basically to speak out to all the schools in a singular manner. But schools would have the ability also to page within their own buildings. I just think overall it's a big step forward in regards to safety security. It should enhance our ability to communicate. I think it's also another endeavor if we would like to pursue in regards to the fact that we get arguments often, and if the board is inclined over time to look at the cell phone policy, that if we have a physical phone connection in every classroom, that alleviates a lot of the concerns. Well, if there was an emergency situation, I need to get a hold of my child when we have functioning phone systems in all of our classrooms. I think that would be a good first step to alleviate that stated concern that often comes up when you talk about cell phone policies. But Mr. Sines put out an RFP, received four bids. This is actually the lowest cost alternative, but I feel like it gives us great flexibility. I'm just trying to think anything else that he told me. I wish he could have probably spoken to it much better than I have. One thing that I think is sometimes a concern when you're using voice over IP systems, if the phone system, if the internet is down, it does impact the phone lines. But I think on the other side, if you look on a coin flip, when you're using a traditional phone line system, most of our schools with VoIP systems, West Preston, I think maybe has 3 or 4 phone lines. Preston High has probably 8 to 10, but when all of those lines are concurrently in use, that's when you get a repetitive busy situation. Our smaller schools might have 1 or 2 lines tops. So this is going to provide much greater level of access when parents are calling the building. They shouldn't run into issues with the tied up line nearly as frequently as they are currently. One other piece of functionality is when the phone system is down, there is a manner to transfer potential calls into your VoIP system to an existing cell phone. But however, that cell phone is masked. It would still appear to be the school-based number. It doesn't necessarily identify the individual user's number. And an individual user can also control the times in which calls would come in. So if I were a classroom teacher and I wanted to align my cell phone to my school-based phone in my classroom, I could set my phone up to receive calls maybe just within school-based hours if they weren't wanting to take calls outside of the school day. So again, I think there's a great number of advantages to this. I think it moves us forward, and I think Mr. Sines has done his due diligence to get us the best possible system for our schools at large.
Comments, questions?
So, the state has a lot of issues keeping our internet up. I have concerns about putting them in charge of our phone system, right?
We have to run through that internet connection. That's a concern, Mr.
I mean, that's my big, I mean, what, I think there was something, if I recall, there's something that initiated us thinking about going to VoIP. What was that?
Just the ability to have more functionality and kind of what we've discussed. I mean, I would say this, we have voice over IP, as a point of contention, we have voice over IP systems currently at Preston, at Aurora, at Roseburg, at Brewston, and we have a partial system at South and at Central Preston. So, we have 6 of our 10 schools right now that have it currently in place. We have obviously contemplated the potential for that throughout the East Preston and West. We felt like if we were looking at that direction, it might be, because honestly, the phones that are in place in a lot of those schools that I mentioned were refurb phone units when they were purchased. I mean, they were used units when I bought them, and we've had them in place for a number of years. With this agreement, again, we'd be getting new technology into the schools, and we have certain warranty information that would allow for if we have issues with any of the units in terms of replacement of those units in a timely manner as well. This vendor also has given us assurance, like definitive timelines for implementation, which I think was desirable as well.
Yeah, and I think Mr. Sines did an excellent job on his layout of looking for I mean, he's thorough.
He is.
He was fantastic. I mean,
Yeah,
which is
sure.
what I expect from Mr. Sines. But with that said, he should be commended. I mean, I think I have serious concerns about our phone system being dependent on the state,
Understand
keeping
that.
the internet working. I mean, in an emergency situation, our communications will be down just because our internet is down.
Well, again, though, with that ability to cross over to that secondary line where they can come in on our cell phones, that would not, as long as that's in place, the calls could still come in on your cellular transmission.
And what is that ability? I'm sorry?
We can actually transfer a call, like it's set up if the system is down, that the calls could come in through a stated cellular phone. So we could establish some backup lines for that. What's that? What's that? The E3 system is still in place right now if we can continue to keep that in place. That's a mass communication system as well. But yes, Mrs. Bomar, that's correct.
Since Mr. Seymour, you're here and your school currently has the VoIP, whatever it is, has it gone down in the past year? What's the reliability of it?
I mean, honestly, it has rarely affected us at all. And honestly, when the internet's down, phones maybe go down. Honestly,
Depends on there are situations where they may still function.
I was going to say, sometimes the phones still function. And honestly, if there's an emergency
And there is, within this package, there is training that would be available to train district staff, and then we'd go out and train school-based staff in terms of the use of the phones.
Right,
And some of
right. I
those
think there's
backups.
2 or 3 days
Some of those
per
backup,
site.
there was 2 or 3 days, but really, in
Yeah.
reality, a couple of those days, we may be able to accommodate maybe some of our larger schools with the singular training, but we need to be sure district staff's available with that so we can go out and hit all of our schools.
Yeah, which, just for the board's benefit, I mean, if I were to read just the thing that is on the agenda, it would lead me to believe that it is a one-time cost of $999 for the system implementation as a one-time, so $1,000. But the bid says $999.99 per site. So I don't know which one is correct.
$1,000 upfront for, it's $1,000.
Per school or total?
Total is what Mr. Sines indicated, total.
Okay, but I mean, I think it's page 13. No, it's not gonna be 13.
Which document?
Document, the one that ends in winning bid. And again, he may have gotten further clarification from them, or them saying, because there are some things that say waived, but, and I apologize, and more experienced and smarter board member would write down the page when they read it. Yeah, page 9, just for the, not towards this, but page 9 says 3 days of on-site training and face-to-face at no cost to the county, with 2 trainers there for that. Additional is $60 per an hour. The one thing, I don't know if Mr. Sines had already clarified or not, but that $60 per an hour training for additional training, does that include travel time? Because these guys are 2.5 hours away. And again, I just don't know whether or not.
Typically, we are, for follow-up training that's outside the parameters of the contract, we would be subject to paying for travel time.
Yeah, so if you look at page 10, it says activation fees. There is a one-time activation fee of $999.99 per location for the system. That activation fee will come on the first bill to the county once installation is complete. Now, again.
As
maybe-
I understand it, the location is singular for
Yeah.
Preston County
So
Schools.
that
and
may be
that's-
just
that
what
was
they
That's what
consider it.
Mr. Sines conveyed to me is that basically $1,000 upfront cost.
Yeah.
But he did not reference that for location by location.
Yeah, so again, that's, as I said, he may have understood that, or they may have clarified that by location, they just mean it's one system since you're doing it, even though it's multiple buildings
Well,
over a
and
WAN.
before we would and obviously, before we would proceed with this, I can clarify on that before, because we have not executed this contract at this point.
Yeah.
And because of the fiscal thresholds, this wasn't one that I put on the policy 8200, but I wanted to obviously, this is still a substantial investment, and I wanted the board to be available with the information.
Yeah, no, I
can
appreciate
certainly
that.
follow
Like-
up on that to ensure that we're talking about a singular $999 fee versus that times 10 locations.
Yeah,
Because that obviously would be a big difference.
yeah. This is for leased, so the $2,999 a month includes that lease cost is what I assume. I
Correct.
could not find that definitively by my perusing of the documents, but that would be my understanding, is that includes the lease.
That's correct. And what I would say is obviously, if we would see a reduction, I mean, obviously, we've talked about school closure measures tonight. If there were a reduction in classrooms requiring phone services, we would see a reduction in that contract based upon, lines that we would remove from the system.
Okay. How long is our lease agreement? Do you know?
Honestly, Mr. Kisner, I'm not certain of the
Okay.
the
I mean, they're
term.
giving us a lifetime warranty, but if in 10 years, those phones aren't gonna be
Well, I
worth
would say
anything,
this,
right?
it's a year-to-year agreement that we would have to bring forth. We really can't enter into a long-term
Okay.
contract. And they signed off, if you looked at the one associated document, that gives us an out that either party can provide 30 days' notice and exit from the contract. So
Okay.
I think their thought process is if a district is going to go to the major to change out all their phones and do all this, they're probably not looking to jump out of
Right.
this. So, they can kind of go into this good faith thinking that while they're entering in on a year-to-year contract, that there's a better than average chance that the district would, districts that incorporate this would want to continue this service.
Yeah.
Because it's not an easy process to change out all your phones. When I was the tech director, I used to hate when we had all the school ads and I had to get all those new lines established, and it was never fun.
Yeah, just to set up your voicemail response.
Well, it was elevator lines, it was just, there was all kinds of stuff associated, but.
Okay, so one other item I know, and I've mentioned it to you already, Mr. Martin, but can we look to see if we can keep the main line numbers for the school? So
Sure.
if parents already have PHS number programmed in, they can keep that, et cetera.
It says in the contract that
I
all
believe
your
that,
phone
I believe
numbers
we
will
can
stay the same.
maintain our
Okay.
current
It
numbers.
is what it says in the, yeah, it does list that in there.
And then just guidelines and trainings for teachers so that they're not interrupted if the phone's ringing in their room by a parent calling, et cetera.
Well, I think
Which I'm sure
you
you'll
can
handle
mute,
all
yeah, I was gonna say, you can mute the ringer in instances like that if you chose to.
But I'll personally say I really appreciate you bringing this to us so that we can, as a public and a board, discuss it because it is a big move.
It is.
But we really appreciate you bringing it forward to us.
I believe that it lists 16 analog lines for fax machines, alarms, and elevators. So are those going to have to be purchased from Frontier?
Those have been purchased from Frontier. I'm not certain if we'll be able to eliminate those or not. The one other matter is, we do have some lines associated, like with our gas meters, in which we
Right.
receive preferred rates by maintaining a phone line, although we have an issue, one at the high school when they put the wrestling facility in, we've got a line that was severed there, so we're working to try to get that reestablished. But I can clarify in terms of what we need to do in terms of maintenance on those. But we are required, I know, on those elevator lines, we have to be able to communicate with our elevators. They won't pass inspection otherwise.
Right, and I said, just with it being 16 of them, that if I looked across the schools, like, and they reference it, but if we have to maintain 16 lines with Frontier, I assume part of this is we're going from 38,000 a year with Frontier to about 36,000 with this VoIP. I don't know what the cost of those 16 lines is going to be as far as, I imagine it's going to make up more than the difference of the $2,000.
Usually they're about $30 per line.
A month per line.
Yeah. We can do some, on the elevator lines too, sometimes we'll get some preferred rates depending, because they're not necessarily heavily utilized.
And you would think that we would get those preferred rates even with not giving our other business for the regular lines with them?
Well, I mean, if they want to spike, if they would spike prices on them, and we could certainly put out for bid those additional lines, and local vendors like, we have local vendors like Prodigy or Atlantic Broad, or it's not Atlantic Broadband anymore, but there are certainly vendors out there that could bid on services if we would see a major spike in price. And I can say, we had a vendor years ago when I was a tech director that they were going to dramatically increase our phone lines, and there's no way I could stay on them. I had to shift those lines to another vendor because I got the impression that vendor just wanted to get out of the phone business in this area, so they were spiking the prices to a point there was no way we could have kept those on.
Yeah. I mean, I'll just leave it as, I have serious concerns about just it being so dependent on the internet. I don't know if we've already contacted the state, if there would be a way for these phone lines to run on a port that would go outside of their DNS so that we wouldn't have the issues every time something goes wrong in one of their DNS tables and brings their internet down. The phone lines would potentially be able to stay up. Mr. Signs, again, way smarter than I am.
I can follow up.
He's
with
way
you.
farther
Yeah.
ahead, but I know he's
That's
not
a
able to
valid
be
concern.
here. But I just think that's a pretty big concern. I have a couple other questions that I'll send him. Like, since this is not a decision-making, I won't hold everybody else for some of the fun technical stuff in the back. I just, he can answer some of those. That would be my personally, either it's important to have them in the classrooms for, if we're going to pitch it as a safety and security thing, but for it to have
Dependability.
to go through that state is really problematic because, we've had board meetings held up because
Yeah,
trying to get the issues with the state resolved.
I can tell you, I've had analog phone lines at Kingwood Elementary that were down for weeks.
Yeah.
And I basically just called Frontier and said, this has been 2 weeks. I was at Fellows,ville when as a principal out there, and somebody stole copper, and I didn't have phone or internet service for like 3 weeks.
So how about we'll put this on the agenda for the next meeting for an update
Sure.
on it. Okay. Is that good?
Thank you.
Okay. Next, let's move to the levy check report. This is an informational item. It's letting us know what monies were spent from levy expenditures since the last board meeting. I'll clarify to the public that this is money that was left over from the previous year, but it was spent in the same categories as what the levy call required by law. Is there any comments or questions? Okay, hearing none, we'll move to the next item, which is the schedule of checks. It's recommended that the board approve the schedule of checks to be written. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Kisner,
Second.
We'll go a second by Mr.
It
Hovatter.
was close.
I had my good ears on the right here, so that's what I heard first. Okay, comments, questions?
I have a question on this lengthy list. It's kind of vague. And I'm sure there's no doubt that like the people's names up here, this is all reimbursement costs for travel expenses, training, whatsoever. There's no doubt that it's not legitimate. Is there a way we can see the receipts that are attached to each?
Mr. Hovatter, I mean, if, in terms of trying to supply that to the meeting, it would be difficult, although, I mean, we have, if we were to go back with an associated purchase order, it would have, you know, the invoicing, I mean, like on these, for example, these travel reimbursements, I mean, we would have the forms that were filled out by the employees specifying their mileage. They would include any receipts that were taken. So, I mean, we have that documentation, but to probably upload all of that into the agenda would be a little unwieldy. But what I would say is if you have specific concerns on any particular expenditure items, we certainly can give a greater level of detail as requested.
Well, and some of this does have the PO numbers on it, but a lot of it doesn't. That's why, you know, it's the reimbursement part. Do the reimbursements get PO numbers also?
No, the reimbursements require a professional meeting form to be filed by the employee, which would give a anticipated budget of expenses related to their travel. So that has to be submitted in addition to any of their submitted receipts and so forth associated with their travel.
And other board members can correct me if I'm wrong, but Mr. Hovatter, if you have a question, you can schedule a time with the treasurer to come in and you have full rights to review any files and backup information of the board's business, and so that you can do that. But as Mr. Martin's saying, it would be a gigantic burden to put all that data.
Well,
on
it
here.
is
But
a
you,
lot.
but I'm saying is you can request any information that you would like to see.
But like even you were talking about not an associated purchase order, but if you gave a particular employee's name, you know, that would be, you know, an available fiscal record back there. I mean, we would have information on that.
I'm not
And
questioning.
that, but that has to be
I
maintained,
just-
and that has to be maintained beyond this fiscal year. I mean, we have to maintain that for several years, so, even past expenditures, we can potentially research.
But it's good that you ask these questions.
Absolutely.
A, so that you
Yep.
know that, but also that the public knows that you are looking at expenses, because we have to approve these checks to be, the checks have not been written, so the board has to approve it. But all of the backup files exist, and, you know, it's great to come in and request the backup, because it keeps everyone on their toes, as any business would have to do.
Sure.
But this is a public.
That's what I was thinking.
But this is a public business where you have the legal right to actually see that as a board member.
Yep.
Yeah, within my business, I wouldn't pay anything without the invoice or the statement and the invoice attached. And with this, it's just vague to me, but
And they have those
I
same,
appreciate the
they have those same requirements also, to have that backup in the treasurer's office.
Yeah, when a purchase order is established, you have to be able to supply the packing slips associated with the order, and then also submit invoicing so that then Mrs. Fike can initiate payment on that. But all of that is required. Same thing with the travel reimbursements. Again, there has to be an associated professional meeting form that's filed, it's approved by multiple members of the staff here. And then again, the required documentation, I mean, it could go into such like, you have to be very specific. Let's say, for example, it's a food expenditure. Like if you just had a receipt that just said for the amount but didn't have an itemized listing, that would not be something that could be approved. Well, you have to be able to go through and indicate, you know, what items were purchased. You have to discount, for example, any taxes can't be paid. For example, like if there were travel associated with food, like alcoholic beverages would be something that would be not an appropriate expenditure item as well. And those are very closely scrutinized with Mrs. Fike, and when she goes through those, you know, I can tell you if there's a problem with them, she kicks them back and requests additional information as needed.
I can vouch that occurs as well.
And like I said, it's not like I have anything in question. It was just for information
Oh,
purposes. I was
absolutely,
asking
sir.
that
Yep.
question. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Kisner, any questions or comments? Nope. Okay, Mr. Zigray?
Nope.
Okay, I'll call the vote on the motion to approve the schedule of checks.
Voting is open. Motion passes 4-0.
Okay, the next item on our agenda is the recommendation to approve the extended day and supplemental salary scale for the 2024-2025 academic year. There is a document in the public folder that breaks all that out. Mr. Martin, do you have any specific information or recap?
I just would indicate that anything that's marked in yellow or is stricken, that is just that it is either verbiage that was included in the previous past, the supplemental extracurricular scale, or it is wording that's been added. So, for example, if you look at the first page, child nutrition, you see the marked coordinator is off. With Mrs. Durr, she was hired as a child nutrition coordinator based on her degree level. The new hire, Mr. Hogue, was slotted as a child nutrition and county testing director. His position was hired as such. So we're making adjustments to the scale to be reflective of the position changes that have occurred. Beyond that, I mean, we've had some reduction of some positions, but in essence, these are just some updates. There's not really a substantial amount of change associated. One thing that you'll see, guys, obviously, and again, taking into account the possibility of the passage of the soccer position, the unified soccer boys and girls has been added in here at a $0 expenditure mark in line with what was voted upon tonight. Had that not been passed, we would have had to go through and make adjustments prior to voting on this. But that's, in a nutshell, Mr. Tatham, where we're at is just the associated updates to this policy are marked in yellow. Some things are stricken from previous years, adds are in yellow and unmarked.
Okay, so we have information from the superintendent. Is there a motion to approve the recommended changes?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Hovatter,
Second.
second by Mr. Kisner. Okay, we'll now have discussion by the board.
The only comment I have is I still have serious concerns about the technology technicians going down from 2 down to 1. We've just got more technology than ever, and
Is that levy
even with
related?
some of them, what's that?
Is that levy related?
Yes. Yeah, one of those positions, and it's, if the technology does not stay up, the children are going to be the ones really suffering, right? Like, if I'm the student whose my laptop breaks and I'm waiting in the queue to get fixed, or if my credentials break and I'm waiting in the queues to get fixed so that I can get logged in, all of that stuff is going to have adverse effects on educational value and time and energy. And I know they've done an excellent job of keeping up with the number of issues that we've had, but there's going to be repercussions. And I know you're only doing what you can do with your budget. I just saying there's going to be repercussions here that's going to be bad.
And we were talking earlier, I mean, this is an instance, this is a direct impact of the failure of the levy, because this was a levy-based position.
So is this also a position that's through the state formula to hire?
It can be inclusive in the state aid formula, although, correct, Angie, because they're classified technically under a teacher credential, am I right?
Not a technician.
So a technician is not, a TSS is.
The specialists.
Oh, just the TIS. I'm sorry, I'm speaking in error here. So often these positions have been, one of these positions has generally been out of step 7, one has been out of E-rate. Which E-rate is, we get approximately 85% of our internet expenses are reimbursed. I mean, we have to file for this annually and file paperwork, but approximately 85% of our internet-related costs are reimbursed. That helps to provide funding for Mr. Sines' salary and one additional technician.
Well, I have to agree with Mr. Kisner. I think this is an important position, and it's going to have a detrimental effect on just the learning of the children. I mean, when you have as much technology as we have going on and so many avenues, we might want to maybe consider reevaluating that position and see if we can find funding somewhere in order to keep that position open.
Well, I would say this, I mean, we'll continue to monitor. Mr. Sines will report out in September. You know, we can look at the submitted work orders and timelines. I mean, I think we'll be able to see a direct correlation to the level of impact this has had, because he keeps outstanding metrics in terms of submitted work orders, In terms of timelines and how long it's taking to respond, I think we'll have some good information to make decisions moving forward. I will say that the levy call, that the movement of funding out of the technology fund accounted for potentially 2 technology positions within levy-based funds, but obviously that wouldn't go into effect until the 25-26 school year based on the potential election results this year.
All right, one minor thing, it's just a typo. The date needs to be changed from the previous
Oh,
date,
shoot, yes, I'm sorry.
from the top of it.
I assume
We
that.
sat and made all those changes, Ms. Martin, we missed that one.
I have
No,
my,
Angie,
I
I sat down.
I have my
I'll
red,
take, I should have
I have
noticed
my
that.
red pen here somewhere.
I'll make sure that's updated when we reload the document.
I assume just the thing with the volleyball where it went from 6 to 5 and we crossed out Aurora. I don't know, was that a coach or a student lack of interest that
The school
results in that?
hasn't, the school hasn't requested the position.
Okay, so current school administration has not desired to have that sport and has not opted in for that. Okay.
Yeah, and I think some of that relates to the level of enrollment. Aurora has a pretty substantial number of kids participating in cross-country. I think some of it is just the number of student athletes available to field that sport.
Okay.
We would also, up there, we would have to make some adjustments to the existing gymnasium to accommodate for volleyball play, because it's not currently set up.
It doesn't have pole holes
Right.
in the
Things
floor.
there's
Okay.
things we could do if that's ultimately requested.
Okay, I just didn't know what happened, how it gets decided when it comes off.
I
but
think
that
it had
makes
been
sense.
accounted for as a possible
Yeah.
position last year, and we know that this year it's not been requested, so
Okay,
we
all right.
eliminated it as such.
Thank you for the clarification.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Okay, hearing that, I'll call the vote for the recommendation to approve the extended day and supplemental salary scale for the upcoming academic year.
So moved.
I'm just calling the vote.
Voting is open.
You're really screwing me up with doing that. Again, I keep thinking, I swear I did that once. I apologize. We started we started Aldersgate Camp this week, and I am fried from being with 40 youngins already, and it's only day one.
See the sun.
Motion passes 4-0.
Okay, moving on, we have our maintenance work order system update. This is informational only, and there's a document in the public folder of maintenance items so far.
And Mr. Tatham, I would say this is a compilation for, the second page is a compilation of the year-end totals. It extended a little bit beyond July 1st. We were making some adjustments on some active orders. And we wanted to get this on for this board's review.
Okay. Any comments? Okay, thank you very much for all the work. If you pass on to the team for the maintenance work. I know a lot has been accomplished this year, and I'm sure much more is needed to be accomplished, which is it's an ongoing cycle.
There's a lot.
Okay, is there any items that board members would request to be put on the agenda for the next meeting? Well, not, the next meeting is
The 5th,
the special meeting, for the next regular
so
meeting.
the 12th.
No, Mr. Hobart, or anything you need for the next regular meeting on the agenda? Mr. Zigray?
No.
Okay. Anything else then for the good of the order? Okay, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Kisner,
Second.
second by Mr. Hovatter. Any discussion? Well, then I will call the vote to adjourn.
Voting is open.
You're awake for that.
Yeah.
Motion passes 4-0 at 8:59.
All right, and thank you everyone for attending.